Ashley Ellerin was like many beautiful young women in Hollywood. Vivacious, fun-loving fixtures of the party circuit with no shortage of friends. With a bungalow within walking distance of the fabled Hollywood Walk of Fame, Ellerin lived in an enclave frequented by actors, directors, producers, and others seeking to grab a foothold in the limelight. The 22-year-old left her upper-middle-class family in Northern California and arrived in Hollywood in 1999. The striking blonde turned heads and soon started modeling. She also enrolled in the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising because she was creative and thought she could be a designer. But with the Hollywood lifestyle came a seamier side. Friends said Ellerin used cocaine and crystal methamphetamine while partying nights away. She would also take trips to Las Vegas, where she worked as a stripper and pole dancer, according to court records. She hung out with a lot of Hollywood celebrity-type people, said her roommate Jennifer DeSisto. She was very kind of friendly and, kind of a free spirit type. One of her biggest coups was snagging up-and-coming actor Ashton Kutcher as a boyfriend. The pair had been seen out and about in Hollywood together before he asked her to attend a post-Grammy Awards party on February 21, 2001. The plan was for Kutcher to watch the ceremony at a friend's house and meet Ellerin afterward around 10:30 p.m. The couple spoke on the phone at 7:30 p.m. and again at 8:24 p.m. Everything seemed set, but Ellerin never showed up. Getting no answer on her cell phone, Kutcher drove to her home thinking that she might be waiting for him to pick her up. He knocked on her front door at 10:45 p.m., but still got no answer. He tried the doorknob, but it was locked. Kutcher peered through a window and couldn't really see anything wrong. The only thing that stood out to him was a dark red spill that looked like red wine on a landing leading to her bedroom. Thinking that she was upset and had brushed him off for some reason, Kutcher concluded that she was probably out with someone else, so he left, according to court records. Ellerin's roommate didn't sleep at home the night of the Grammys because she had left her keys at a friend's house. Half an hour before Kutcher showed up, she had knocked on the door hoping to get in. Ellerin's car was in the driveway and the lights were on. When there was no answer, Jennifer DeSisto left and came back at 8:30 the next morning after she had retrieved her keys. Upon entering the house, DeSisto didn't notice anything unusual at first. Then she saw Ellerin on a carpeted landing leading to the bedrooms. "She kind of played a lot of jokes," DeSisto later testified in court. "I kind of walked toward her. As I got closer, I knew. She was relatively blue in the face and had some blood around here. There was blood around her mouth." Wearing a turquoise terry cloth robe, Ellerin lay face up on the landing, sprawled in a large pool of blood. Someone had tried to cut off Ellerin's head, creating a wound so deep that it had only been stopped by her spinal cord. Her attacker evidently tried to finish the job from behind. A V-shaped wound was gouged across the back of her neck as well. High-velocity blood spatter flung from the murder weapon marked the walls, ceiling, and even a nearby bathroom. In a frenzied attack, someone had stabbed the model 47 times as she had vainly tried to fend off the assailant with her hands and arms, even grabbing the blade of the knife at one point. Ellerin was stabbed in the chest, abdomen, and back with some of the wounds so deep that they pierced her lung. 12 of her wounds, some up to 6 inches deep, would have been fatal by themselves, according to a medical examiner. The back of her head had been stabbed as well. One of the stabbings actually penetrated the skull and took out a chunk of the skull like a puzzle piece. Los Angeles Police Detective Tom Small would later testify. Ellerin's legs were slightly apart and one of them bent. An odd way to fall, leading Small to speculate that her body had been moved. Some of her chest wounds appeared to have a downward thrust, suggesting she had been on the ground when stabbed. A bloody Adidas tennis shoe print on the hardwood living room floor led away from the gruesome scene. In less than 2 years, Ellerin's Hollywood dream had violently ended. "This was violent overkill," said Small, who responded to the scene as the lead detective. "The killer was a modern-day Jack the Ripper, vicious and very personal. He wanted to inflict as many wounds as he could. I knew in my mind that the person who did this was a serial killer, that he had done this before and had gotten away with it." Small quickly determined that the crime hadn't been a sexual assault, nor motivated by robbery. Ellerin had been wearing jewelry, and a $300 bundle of cash was found in the home. Under her robe, the model had been wearing a bra, boxer-style underwear, and a camisole. The windows were locked with security bars, and the locked front door was behind a metal screen door. None of these areas had pry marks. Either the killer had a key, or Ellerin had invited her killer into the house. Small immediately began interviewing anyone he could find who knew her. Not a small task. The beautiful young woman loved parties and was friendly and popular. People had been drawn to her. She experimented and ran in circles that the average person wouldn't want to run into, Small said. She did some things as an adult you wouldn't be proud of, but she was a sweet gal that everybody loved. His partner, Detective Thomas Chevalek, spoke to Kutcher, who had not called 911 because it had not been apparent that a crime had been committed. He said there were no window coverings, so he can clearly see into the residence, Chevalek would later testify. He said the place was in a bit of disarray because she had been painting the walls, so that didn't raise any alerts to him. He saw what he assumed to be red wine on the carpet area that led to her bedroom. Ellerin's father had been visiting and was helping with her home renovation project. She had dropped him off at the airport at 5:50 p.m. on the day she died. Later that evening, Ellerin had been visited by Mark Durbin, manager of her rental house, who repaired a light fixture. The two had ended up having sex, Durbin later testified. As he was getting ready to leave around 8:15 p.m., Durbin said, Ellerin asked him not to go because she didn't feel like attending the Grammy party. But Durbin was also involved with someone else, and that woman was due at his house. He locked the front door, looked back through the window, and blew Ellerin a kiss. Durbin lived in the complex and could see the front of Ellerin's home from his own. An hour later, he happened to look out his window and saw a motion sensor light up the walkway in front of Ellerin's home. In the light, Durbin saw a light-haired man about 6 feet tall and 175 pounds walking back and forth according to court records. Through the accounts of the dozens of people that Small interviewed, one constant kept popping up: the heater guy. It seemed like most of Ellerin's friends had something to say about a mysterious heater repairman who had kept inserting himself into the model's life. It had started a year before her death. She had been standing in front of her house with her friend Christopher Duran, who was fixing a flat tire on his car. A man walked up to help. He was a heating and air conditioning man, and he gave us a card, Duran would later testify. Soon, the stranger was showing up at Ellerin's house for unannounced visits or phoning her. He said he lived about a block away and walked his dog at a park across the street from her home. One incident in particular stood out. He showed up at the door out of breath, sweating, and told us about there were cops at his house asking him about his ex-girlfriend in Chicago that was killed, and he was avoiding the police, Duran said. After Ellerin's death, Duran said he saw the man in front of her house just staring at it. Justin Peterson, who had lived with Ellerin briefly, testified later that he once had given the man a ride home from an art gallery opening they'd both attended. While in the car, the man grabbed Peterson's arm and squeezed very hard. He dropped the stranger off at a green Ford pickup around 10 p.m. Peterson returned to the home he shared with Ellerin around 3 a.m. and saw the truck parked in front, the motor running and lights off, and a person sitting inside. The next day, the man arrived to fix Ellerin's heater, and Peterson demanded to know what he was doing outside their house. He started stuttering, and he eventually tells me he couldn't go home, Peterson said. He said that the FBI was there waiting to collect DNA samples from him. He continues to tell me his best friend's girlfriend was murdered. The man put his foot up on a table and his raised pant leg, revealing a hunting knife with a jagged edge strapped to his shin. A month before Ellerin died, she had thrown a party, and the mysterious stranger had been invited. He sat on a couch, didn't socialize, and stared at Ellerin the whole time. She thought he was a nice person, and that's why she didn't fear him, Peterson said. In Detective Small's line of work, too many coincidences are usually suspicious. And this strange heater guy who had no name had been neither a friend nor a lover of Ellerin. Yet he had frequently sought her company. Always the gregarious one. Ellerin had complied. During numerous interviews, Small was told that the heater guy had once bragged about suing the owner of a truck who had struck him while he had been crossing a street near his home. The vehicle had belonged to a contractor who had been constructing the Kodak Theater on Hollywood Boulevard, now home to the Academy Awards ceremony. Small contacted that company and inquired about lawsuits with pedestrians. None were found. Undaunted, he did a records check on all reported accidents in that area around the time of construction and came up with a hit. Someone had struck a dog, and the dog's owner had been one Michael Gargiulo. Now he had a name, and with that came a driver's license picture. Armed with the new information, Small revisited his witnesses with a grouping of 6 photos including Gargiulo's, and asked them to pick out Gargiulo if possible. They did. Small continued working on the case. Then things took an unexpected turn in the fall of 2002. While at work one day, Small was visited by a few detectives who had flown out from the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois. They had a photo of Gargiulo and his name. When they said the name, I asked my partner to come over quick, Small said. They said, "You know that guy?" I said, "I think he's a potential suspect in my case." They were taken aback. The Cook County detectives were investigating a 1993 murder and had tracked Gargiulo to Los Angeles in hopes of obtaining a DNA sample. He could not be located. In the following weeks, Small obtained a search warrant for a new Los Angeles address where Gargiulo was last known to have lived, a van he was driving, and a court-ordered DNA sample. The van was located, and detectives found 3 different knives, a box cutter, binoculars, and the vehicle's license plates inside. Gargiulo's apartment was sparsely furnished with no furniture other than a kitchen table and a chair. The bedding was on the floor, and men's clothing hung in the closet. A backpack containing a plastic Halloween mask and a handgun was also found, according to court files. Gargiulo eventually arrived home, and he was transported to a hospital to give blood, hair, and urine samples for a DNA test that would be forwarded to Cook County. "What if my DNA was on a keychain that was left at a crime scene?" Gargiulo suddenly blurted out while en route to the hospital, court records said. "They can't find my DNA from 10 years ago at a crime scene, can they? Why did it take them so long to find the DNA?" LAPD Detective Michael Pelletier, who was in charge of taking Gargiulo to the hospital, later testified to saying, "What are you talking about?" "Never mind," Gargiulo replied. Tricia Picaccio had been a beautiful, studious, popular 18-year-old girl days away from moving away to Purdue University to major in genetic engineering. Growing up in the upscale Chicago suburb of Glenview, Picaccio had had a storybook life filled with cheerleading friends, music, and the debate team. Not one to drink or party, Picaccio would rather be at home reading or studying. She had also lived 1 block away from Gargiulo. On August 13, 1993, Picaccio was walking down the street on her way to meet her boyfriend, who was going to take her to a doctor's appointment. Gargiulo, who was then 17, drove by in his father's van with another friend inside and stopped to offer Picaccio a ride. She accepted and was dropped off at her designated meeting place. The next day, Picaccio got up as usual and went to her job at a department store cosmetics counter. She then came home and took a shower before heading out with 2 girlfriends to a road rally. "I used to always tease her about using all the hot water," said her father, Rick Picaccio. "When she got done washing her hair, there was no hot water. I said, 'Take it easy on the hot water,' and that's the last time I saw her alive." After the rally, the girls ate at a TGI Fridays restaurant. Then Picaccio went home. It was 12:30 a.m. On the front porch with her key in hand, Picaccio never made it inside. Someone came up behind, twisting Picaccio's left arm behind her back to the point that it fractured, according to court files. Then she was stabbed a dozen times, including 3 fatal wounds to her heart, her left lung, and abdomen. She was also stabbed in the arm, the collarbone, and in the back, a medical examiner later testified. The attack happened so quickly that Picaccio didn't have a chance to fight back. As Picaccio fell to the ground, though, dropping her door key next to her head, she was able to do one thing that would help detectives 17 years in the future and 1,700 miles away. She got someone's DNA under her fingernails. Picaccio's body went undiscovered until the next morning when her father opened the front door. Unable to bear the tragedy, Picaccio's family moved out of the home for 4 years. Medical examiners recovered the DNA from under Tricia's fingernails, but couldn't make a match until they received Gargiulo's blood sample from Los Angeles in 2003. Gargiulo was born in 1976 and grew up with 6 siblings, including several sisters, and he lived 100 yards away from the Picaccio family. He wasn't the most popular kid in the neighborhood. He always was the odd one out of his family, who were all very nice people. He was just always angry and taking it out on others, usually by bullying them. Diane Picaccio, Tricia's mother, remembers Gargiulo playing with one of her 2 sons as they grew up. However, unlike other neighborhood kids, Gargiulo would never come inside the Picaccio home for lunch. Although Gargiulo knew her son, Diane said, Tricia never had any type of contact with him. One day, Diane went over to the Gargiulo home to pick up her younger son, who had been playing with one of Gargiulo's brothers. She was shocked by a conversation that she had with his parents. The parents said, "We are afraid of Michael. We would like to kick him out of the house, but we're afraid he will come back and kill us," Diane recalled. His father said, "He probably needs medicine, but he won't take it." The day Tricia's body was found, Gargiulo called up his girlfriend, saying he was upset, nervous, and scared, and wanted her to go with him to run an errand. She later testified that Gargiulo got out of a car with a small green canvas bag that he said contained knives. Gargiulo disposed of the bag in a building, she said. After Tricia's murder, Gargiulo's parents packed up and moved, leaving Gargiulo alone in the house, Diane Piccaccio said, adding that his mother later died of cancer. Gargiulo later moved to Los Angeles, where began working out at a gym with sights on a pro boxing career. He also trained in martial arts and worked as a bouncer at a Sunset Strip nightclub. Standing 6'2" and with a dragon tattoo on his back, the muscular Gargiulo was physically formidable. Good-looking, Gargiulo went through a string of girlfriends, including Velma Carrillo, whom he met in an online chat room. He told her he was a boxer training for the Olympics and had left Chicago because his best friend's sister had been murdered. He claimed the police were trying to pin the crime on him, according to court files. Gargiulo went on to say that his DNA would be at the crime scene because the victim was almost family to him. Los Angeles County Sheriff's Detective Joseph Purcell later testified regarding a Gargiulo conversation with Carrillo. Michael Gargiulo would tell her how DNA and the science of DNA would be used to capture suspects. Gargiulo thought of himself as an expert of sorts because he was an avid watcher of forensics and crime-related television shows. Other women had more violent encounters. Maria Girola dated Gargiulo and found him to be forceful, demanding, and threatening. He once struck her, and she suffered a detached retina, Purcell testified. Michael Gargiulo had threatened to kill her if she ever left him and had also told her that because of his study and degree in forensics, he would be able to kill her and get away with it, Purcell testified. Another girlfriend called the police when he shocked her with a taser gun, according to court files. He lived with various women off and on and fathered several children. His job as a bouncer was left behind for something more stable, work as an air conditioning and heating repairman who used blue medical booties at work. El Monte is a small, working-class suburb of Los Angeles where someone like Maria Bruno could blend into the landscape while going about her daily life. It's a lower-income area where residents eke out a living in the shadow of their wealthy Los Angeles neighbors 15 miles west, a place that has seen an influx of prostitution, drugs, and gang crime over the past several decades. But there are pockets where people like Bruno, 32 and single, lived in safety and relative comfort. That is, until the night of December 1st, 2005. On that night, a Jack the Ripper-style killer struck inside Bruno's apartment in a frenzied attack that left the vivacious, aspiring model looking like she'd been drained of half her blood. Like the final Ripper victim, Mary Kelly, 107 years before, the killer had the benefit of an enclosed place where he could spend time systematically mutilating her body. I've been a homicide detective for 17 years, and this was one of the most gruesome crime scenes I've ever seen, said Los Angeles Sheriff's Detective Mark Lilienfeld. There was a massive amount of blood. It's amazing what type of damage one person could inflict on another. The killer had entered Bruno's apartment through a kitchen window after she had gone to bed. He took a butcher knife from a sealed package in the kitchen and used it to slash her throat all the way down to her spine and stabbed the petite woman 17 times in the chest, arm, and abdomen. Bruno had once commented to friends that there had been a weird guy at her building who had been seen watching her. About 5 days before her death, the man followed her from the parking lot into her home and then exited about 10 seconds later. When asked about it, she told neighbors, "Oh, he's okay." Her body was discovered by her ex-husband Irving Bruno, who came to her house to take her to work. He was not considered a suspect because the pair had had an amicable divorce and remained friends. The killer had stalked Maria, knew her routine, and knew she lived alone. It's someone who planned it, was methodical, systematic, organized, and knew what they were doing, Lilienfeld said in 2005. He obviously spent some time at the scene, a minimum of 15 minutes and perhaps several hours. The detective found a blue hospital-style paper booty in front of Bruno's apartment. It contained Bruno's blood and skin cells around the plastic that weren't large enough to get a DNA match. The witnesses who saw the man stalking Bruno worked with police to produce a composite drawing, which Lilienfeld distributed around Los Angeles. 6 months after the attack, Gargiulo was in a Pasadena restaurant with his girlfriend when she saw the bulletin in the women's restroom. Back at her table, girlfriend Kwok Na-hyun remarked about the composite in passing. Gargiulo responded that he knew the woman and she was very beautiful with big breasts, according to court files. Santa Monica is a wealthy playground of sun, fun, and beautiful people. In 2008, it was home to Michelle Murphy, a beautiful 28-year-old blonde who worked in movie post-production and lived in an upstairs apartment a dozen blocks from the beach. Often going for a jog or exercising in the carport under her apartment, Murphy would sometimes see a van parked in the alley with the name Gus the Plumber painted on the side. Once in a while, she'd see a tall, dark-haired man near the van and would say hello in passing. On April 28, 2008, Murphy went to sleep just like any other night, but suddenly awoke just before midnight to the searing pain of someone plunging a knife into her chest. A man was straddling her body and continued stabbing her in the shoulder and right arm as she wriggled sideways to get away. At one point, Murphy grabbed hold of the blade, which sliced her fingers to the bone, according to police. The assailant was having a difficult time holding down Murphy, who was nude and slippery because of her blood. At one point, the attacker ended up slicing his wrist. He paused, and this allowed Michelle to get feet under his chest and launched him off the bed and onto the wall. He hit the bedroom door, said Santa Monica Police Sergeant Rich Lewis. The attacker then mumbled, "Sorry," before escaping out the front door. He had entered through a window but had left the front door ajar for an easy getaway after the attack. Murphy's quick wits and tenacity had saved her life. Lewis responded to the scene and found a blood trail leading down Murphy's steps and across the alley and down a walkway toward another apartment complex. The blood-soaked bedding was tested for DNA, as were the outside droplets. A month later, Lewis had a match, thanks to the DNA blood sample that Chicago investigators had entered into a national database. It was Michael Gargiulo. In 2007, Gargiulo started working for Gus the Plumber. He had gotten married and moved in with his wife, Ana Luz Gonzalez, who lived in a Santa Monica apartment across an alley from Michelle Murphy. In fact, Gargiulo's new home gave him an unobstructed view into Murphy's kitchen and dining room. The night of Murphy's attack, Gonzalez was home asleep. When Lewis got the DNA match, he remembered a visit he had received a few months earlier from Detective Lilienfeld. Coincidentally, Lilienfeld was inquiring about the murder of another model, Juliana Redding, in Santa Monica, to see whether it might have been similar to Maria Bruno's. Redding's case turned out to be unrelated, but Lewis now wondered if Murphy's attack might be linked. Lewis also got another lead after calling Chicago detectives to talk about Gargiulo. He was told that LAPD had a similar stabbing. The three detectives decided to meet, along with a deputy district attorney. Murphy's case was pretty cut and dried, so the district attorney's office filed an attempted murder charge on June 10, 2008, less than 2 months after the attack. Now that he knew his suspect's name, Lilienfeld discovered that Gargiulo lived in the same apartment complex as Bruno. Even though Gargiulo was long gone, Lilienfeld searched the apartment. He found nothing in the main part of the home but noticed an attic and got a ladder to crawl inside. Up there in a plastic baggie, he discovered a blue medical booty that matched the one he found 2 years earlier in front of Bruno's apartment. This time there were enough skin cells on the new booty to do a DNA test. It came back to Gargiulo, according to court files. Now with DNA matching Gargiulo to 2 murders and 1 attempted murder, Small had enough circumstantial evidence in the similarities of the 4 cases to file his own case with the district attorney's office. Gargiulo was charged with both Bruno and Ellerin's murders on October 20, 2008. A pre-trial hearing took place on June 9, 2017 in Los Angeles Superior Court, setting his trial date for October 2017. However, due to delays, the trial did not commence until May 2, 2019. During the trial, actor Ashton Kutcher provided testimony regarding the crimes. On August 15, 2019, Gargiulo was found guilty on all charges. The penalty phase of his California trial began on October 7, 2019, where he faced the possibility of either a death sentence or life imprisonment without parole. After several hours of deliberation, the jury decided on a death sentence for Michael Gargiulo on October 18, 2019. Nevertheless, sentencing in California was delayed due to defense motions. Ultimately, on July 16, 2021, Gargiulo received a death sentence. Presently, Gargiulo is expected to be extradited to Illinois to face charges for the 1993 killing of Tricia Pacaccio in his hometown. If extradited and convicted in Illinois, he may face a sentence of 25 years to life. The only thing that lacked resolution was the nagging hunch by the three detectives that Gargiulo could be responsible for an untold number of other murders.
The stark realization that the deaths of 7 women since late summer 1997, 4 of whom were killed during the year's final weeks, were the work of a serial killer renewed fears among the public and law enforcement officials alike that the infamous and elusive Green River Killer had found a new killing ground in and around Spokane, Washington. It was only talk and speculation, fueled in large part by the number of bodies being found and the fact that many of the victims were prostitutes. The talk and speculation were only quelled by the fact that the killer's method of operation was markedly different from that of the Green River Killer. Nonetheless, it was a possibility that had to be considered, at least initially, given the fact that serial killers have on occasion changed their MOs. Disturbingly, the number of bodies would more than double before they stopped, and many others would be attributed to the same killer. The first indication that a serial killer was at work in and around this eastern Washington city began on February 22, 1990, a Thursday, at approximately 8:30 a.m., when the Homicide Division of the Spokane Police Department was called to the 4100 block of East Upriver Drive on a report of a young black female whose nude body was lying over the embankment near the Spokane River. The responding officers, and later the detectives, observed that the young woman had been shot a number of times, and the size of the entrance wounds suggested a small caliber gun had been used. An extensive search of the area failed to turn up any of the victim's clothing or personal effects. The search also failed to turn up any bullets or spent shell casings, an indication that either the killer took care in cleaning up after himself, used a gun that didn't eject shell casings, or killed the victim at a different location and then transported the body after death. All that was found with the body was the victim's black wig, a green blanket like those used in the military, a multicolored blanket, and a white towel. After some of the details of the discovery of the victim's body were made public, the victim was identified as 26-year-old Yolanda Sapp. The investigators soon learned that Sapp had a history of prostitution arrests and was known to use drugs. She was last seen 2 days before her body was found in the 3200 block of East Sprague, an area frequented by prostitutes and pimps. At that time, she'd been wearing black jeans, black slip-on flat-soled shoes, black panties, a black t-shirt, and a beige rabbit fur coat, none of which was found with her body. After interviewing those who were close to her, police determined that 9 bracelets were missing from her wrists, as was a silver chain necklace, 2 rings, one of which was a wedding ring, and a jean or denim purse. As would be done with all the victims, hair and fiber samples were taken during autopsy, as were oral, anal, and vaginal swabs. A little more than a month later, another body was found. This time on Sunday, March 25, 1990. The Spokane Police Department was called to the 3200 block of East South Riverton regarding a report of a body found in the road shortly after 6 a.m. The victim was a white female, and it was clear to the investigators that she'd been shot to death. She was eventually identified as 34-year-old Nikki I. Lowe, who, like the previous victim, had a history of prostitution and drug abuse. Lowe was last seen a day earlier in the East Sprague area of Spokane. During Lowe's autopsy, a .22 caliber bullet was retrieved from her body relatively intact, and it was noted that a strong odor of motor oil emanated from her body. Toxicology test results confirmed the presence of cocaine and cocaine metabolites in Lowe's body. Although the detectives investigating the murders of Yolanda Sapp and Nikki Lowe were reasonably certain that both women had been done in by the same killer, little headway was made in the investigation over the next 7 weeks, and no additional bodies were found, leaving investigators wondering whether their killer had moved on to another locale or was just lying low for a while. However, they weren't left wondering for long. On Tuesday, May 15, 1990, at approximately 7:45 p.m., the Spokane County Sheriff's Department responded to a report of a body found in the Trent and Pines area near the banks of the Spokane River. The victim was a white female and was nude except for the rings on her fingers. She also had contusions and lacerations to the head, prompting the investigators to believe that she'd been beaten with a blunt object. They also observed gunshot wounds. Crime scene investigators recovered articles of female clothing from the scene, as well as a pair of shoes, a plastic bag stained with blood, a cigarette butt, and vegetation samples. This time, however, they also found tire tracks, the tire tread patterns, which were carefully photographed. The latest victim was identified as Kathleen Bribois, 38. Bullets were recovered from her body during the autopsy, and trace evidence such as hair and fiber was collected and sent to the State Crime Laboratory. Toxicology tests revealed the presence of morphine and cocaine metabolites in Bribois's body, indicating that she'd used cocaine and most likely heroin prior to her death. Investigators believe that she'd been engaged in prostitution activities at the time of her death. By now, because of the similarities of the victims' deaths, the fact that a small caliber gun was used, and the fact that they were all engaged in prostitution left little doubt in the investigators' minds that they were dealing with a bona fide serial killer. Just when and where he'd strike next was anybody's guess. In the meantime, they were not anywhere close to identifying the killer, and everyone realized that he could leave a large number of bodies in his wake before being apprehended. 2 days short of 2 years passed without any additional victims being found that could be attributed to the Spokane serial killer. By the time the fourth victim came to the attention of the police, the investigators probing the original case didn't know if the killer had moved on to another locale to carry out his dark deeds, or if he'd merely been more careful in hiding his victims' bodies. Investigators opted for the theory that the killer had been murdering women during the 2-year interim in another locale. The awareness that the killer had started up again in Spokane came about on Wednesday, May 13, 1992, when a nude female body was found on Bill Gulch Road, about a quarter-mile east of Mount Spokane Park Drive. Articles of clothing were tangled in the area of the victim's arms and head, and a plastic bag covered her head. As with the previous victims, shoes and other clothing articles were found near the body. Criminalists found what they believed to be a bullet near the body, but no spent shell casings. There was no sign of a struggle and no significant blood pooling in the area of the body, which indicated to the cops that the victim had been killed at a different location and brought to the site and dumped. As with the others, the cause of death was determined to have been gunshot wounds. Bullets were again obtained from the victim's body, along with hair, fiber, and orifice swabs. The Caucasian victim was identified through fingerprint analysis as Sherry Ann Palmer, 19, the youngest victim to date. Subsequent follow-up investigation determined that Palmer had last been seen leaving Al's Motel, known for its use by prostitutes and their johns, located at 1421 North Division in Spokane, on Friday evening, May 1, 1992. Detectives learned that she'd left the motel in a taxicab at approximately 11 p.m. to meet her boyfriend. However, she never arrived at the location where he was to meet her. Although she had a history of involvement in prostitution, Palmer was not known to use illicit drugs. More than 3 years passed before the next victim attributed to the Spokane serial killer was found. By this time, Spokane investigators were communicating with their colleagues in other locales to try to come up with anything that could link the victims to a suspect. Unfortunately, all they had were victims linked by histories of prostitution who had all been killed similarly by gunshot with a small caliber weapon and whose nude bodies had been dumped at various locations. With the latest victim on the other side of the state, in Kitsap County northwest of Seattle, linked to the Spokane serial killer, the investigators now knew he was working in different locales. The fact that the latest victim was found in western Washington also renewed fears that the Green River killer might still be at work. It was on Friday, August 25, 1995, that the nude body of 60-year-old Patricia L. Barnes, a white woman, was found in the vicinity of the 15,900 block of Peacock Hill Road in Kitsap County. Kitsap County Sheriff's Department Detective Ron Trogdon was called to the scene, where he observed that the body was partially covered with cut foliage brought there from a different area. Trogdon located a number of hair curlers at the scene, but little else. However, he found a second pile of foliage similar to that where Barnes's body was found about a mile from the body discovery site. When the criminalists went through the second foliage pile, they found 2 plastic bags that contained hair curlers like those found with the body. Blood was also found at the second location, which was later determined to be Barnes's. Trogdon's follow-up investigation showed that Barnes, so far the oldest victim of the Spokane serial killer, was last seen alive in Seattle on or about August 22, 1995, and was seen wearing curlers in her hair at that time. Barnes was characterized as a street person, but had no known links to prostitution or the use of illicit drugs. She was known to drink alcohol, which was found in her system during the autopsy. The autopsy also recovered 2 .22 caliber bullets from her body. Based on the evidence that was recovered, the victim's lifestyle, ballistics, the manner in which her nude body was found, and the fact that it appeared that Barnes had been killed at a different location and her body subsequently transported and dumped at the location where it was found, prompted Trogdon to contact Detective Marvin R. Hill, assigned to the Spokane Police Department's Serial Killer Task Force. When the evidence and Barnes's background was compared to that of the Spokane victims, there was little room for doubt that both Trogdon and Hill were looking for the same killer. The horror that was taking its toll on the eastern Washington city of Spokane reemerged 10 months after the Kitsap County case. On Friday, June 14, 1996, the decomposed body of 39-year-old Shannon R. Zielinski was found near the intersection of Mount Spokane Park Drive and Holcomb Road in Spokane. Unlike previous victims, who had all been found nude, Zielinski was clad in a short gray dress. According to Detective Hill, a towel had been draped over her torso, and a pair of pantyhose, a pair of white socks, and 1 high black boot were discovered nearby. There was no purse or identification found at the scene, and Zielinski's identity was learned following fingerprint analysis. A shell casing was discovered at the scene, and, like the others, there was little blood pooling and no sign of a struggle, all of which indicated that she'd been killed at a different location. Like all the others, she'd been shot to death. As Detective Hill probed Zielinski's background, he learned that she had known links to prostitution and was known to use illicit drugs. However, due to the decomposed condition of her body, toxicology tests were not possible. Zielinski was last seen on May 27, 1996, at approximately 1 p.m. in the vicinity of Sprague and Helena Streets in Spokane. At that time, she'd been drinking alcohol with a group of males and was contacted by a police officer, but not arrested. According to witnesses, Zielinski left a nearby residence that same evening to work as a prostitute. She was wearing the same gray dress and high black boots and was not seen again until her body was discovered. Tuesday, August 26, 1997, more than a year after Shannon Zielinski's body was found, was a busy day for Spokane detectives when 2 bodies were discovered. The first body found that day was that of 20-year-old Heather L. Hernandez, a known prostitute. Hernandez's decomposing remains were found in a field behind 1817 East Springfield in Spokane, clad only in a shirt and bra. There was no other clothing, shoes, purse, or identification found with the body. Detective Hill observed a visible trail of blood that led from the northeast portion of the parking lot to the field where the body was found, showing that her body was dragged to its final location. She had been killed by gunshot. In another location, Detective Rick Grabenstein, also a member of the Spokane Serial Murder Task Force, investigated the discovery of the body of an Asian female near the North 9800 block of Forker Road. The body was later identified through fingerprints as 16-year-old Jennifer Joseph. Crime scene investigators recovered a light blue towel, a blouse that was missing a mother-of-pearl button, black full-length pants, 2 shoes, panties, a portion of a radio antenna, and a used condom. Like all the others, the investigation suggested that she'd been killed at another location and transported to the area where her body was found. The cause of death? Multiple gunshot wounds. It was noted during the autopsy that Joseph's fingernails and toenails were painted with a polish that contained glitter, fragments of which were found on other parts of her body. 3 stud-type earrings with small pale stones were present in her left ear, but only 2 were found in her right ear, indicating that one was dislodged during the ordeal with her killer. Similarly, one false eyelash was missing from her body, indicating that it likely came off during the incident with the killer. Grabenstein determined that another prostitute who'd been working with her in the East Sprague area last saw Joseph alive at 11:35 p.m. 10 days earlier, on August 16th. The prostitute last saw Joseph traveling eastbound on Thor in the company of a white male, approximately 30 to 40 years old, in a car believed to have been a white Corvette. The car, it turned out, would be the first real lead in the case that tied any of the victims to a suspect. While the investigation into the prostitute murders was in full swing, with detectives and undercover officers frequenting those areas where prostitutes were known to work, a police officer on routine patrol made the first contact with Robert L. Yates, Jr., 45. Yates, driving a 1977 white Corvette with Washington license plate KIH 442, was stopped for a minor traffic infraction at 12:45 p.m. on Wednesday, September 24, 1997, in the vicinity of Sprague and Ralph. Yates was ticketed and allowed to proceed. However, the connection between Yates's Corvette and the murder of Jennifer Joseph was not noted immediately because the patrolman had mistakenly written in his report that Yates had been driving a Camaro. The connection wasn't noted until later, after the task force checked the Camaro's registration and learned that it was actually a Corvette. In the meantime, the bodies continued to pile up. On November 5, 1997, a Wednesday, a local resident stumbled upon a decomposing corpse in the vicinity of South 12,600 Hangman Valley Road. The body, in an obvious attempt to conceal it, had been buried in a shallow grave and was located near a small stream. No clothing, with the exception of a blouse, was recovered. The corpse was later identified as Darla Sue Scott, 29, who had an extensive history of prostitution and drug arrests. Scott had been shot, possibly with a .25 caliber or smaller caliber gun. A plastic bag with handwriting on it was recovered with Scott's body, as was a second grocery-type plastic bag. A styrofoam packing peanut was found nearby on the road. Meanwhile, a month later, another body was discovered in the western part of the state. On Sunday, December 7, 1997, the Tacoma, Washington Police Department responded to a call of a body found in the 5000 block of South Adams Street at 1:30 p.m. The woman's body was nude and was found partially obscured by a bush near the road. What was believed to be the victim's clothing was strewn over her body, and plastic bags covered her head. A .25 caliber spent shell casing was recovered from the scene. The body was subsequently identified as that of 34-year-old Melinda L. Mercer. Missing from the crime scene was a large green purse that Mercer was known to carry, as well as several costume jewelry-type rings. The missing items of Mercer's, as well as the numerous items not recovered from other victims, prompted the detectives to theorize that the killer had kept some of his victims' belongings as trophies or souvenirs of his kills. The Tacoma investigators learned that Mercer was last seen during the late evening hours of December 6th in the parking lot of a QFC grocery store in the 1800 block of Northeast 45th Street in Seattle in the company of a man driving a newer, burgundy-colored minivan. Mercer had a history of prostitution and drug abuse, and toxicology tests revealed that she'd used cocaine and opiates prior to her death. The autopsy showed that she died from gunshot wounds. Another body was found on Wednesday, December 17, 1997, a week before Christmas, in the same area of Spokane where Darla Sue Scott's body had been found in November, this time in the 11,400 block of Hangman Valley Road. The body, which was fully clothed but had plastic bags placed over the head, had been tossed over the side of a steep embankment where it rolled down the hill and came to a rest about 25 feet from the edge of the road. Crime scene investigators recovered a number of hairs and fibers, which were sent to the state crime laboratory for processing. She had been shot to death. The body was later identified as that of 36-year-old Shawn L. Johnson, who was last seen leaving a home in northeast Spokane 2 months earlier on the evening of October 17th to work as a prostitute in the East Sprague area. Johnson was supposed to have called her roommate later on the evening that she disappeared, but she failed to do so and was not seen again until her body was found. Although Johnson's vehicle was found at a Kmart parking lot on East Sprague on October 19th, reported as abandoned by a store employee, it was not taken as evidence by authorities until December 23rd, after her body had been found and it had been determined that she was a victim of the elusive serial killer. It was processed for evidence and a number of items were recovered, including hairs and fibers. 2 more Caucasian female bodies were found the day after Christmas, Friday, December 26, 1997, in the 4800 block of East 14th Avenue in Spokane. Unlike many of the previous bodies, these 2 were fully clothed, except that they were both missing their shoes. Both of the bodies were covered with debris from a wide variety of vegetation alien to the area: lace leaf maple, arbor vitae, birch, rose, hydrangea, Oregon grape, maple, honey locust, forsythia, Japanese barberry, and chrysanthemum, among others. In addition to the vegetation, crime scene investigators recovered soil, rocks, concrete pieces, wood pieces, white paint chips, a red-dyed feather, peanut shells, cherry pits, and a plastic plant identification tag that was found on a plant at a nursery that read Sweet William. The bodies were identified as Lorelei Wason, 31, and Shawn McClenahan, 39. Each of the victims had 3 plastic bags over their heads, and autopsies showed that each had been shot to death. As with all the other victims, the site where their bodies were found was believed to have been only a dumping site after their murders occurred elsewhere. It was also determined that Laurel Wason was wearing a black trench coat when last seen, and Shawn McClenahan was wearing a blue nylon coat. Both coats were missing from their bodies and were not recovered. Were these additional trophies for the killer to savor? The police could only guess at this point. Since it appeared that a substantial attempt had been made to conceal the bodies, along with the fact that a large variety of debris and plant material was used, the investigators theorized that the debris and plant material may have been brought from the suspect's home or another place that he had access to. They noted that when a suspect was eventually identified, comparisons of the vegetation and debris material could be made with that found at the suspect's premises and could prove important in forming a link between the perpetrator and the dump site locations. On Sunday, February 28, 1998, 2 full months into the new year, a white female body was discovered in a ditch on Graham Road in a rural area of Spokane County. The body was identified as that of 41-year-old Sunny G. Oster, a known prostitute and drug user. Oster's body was fully clothed, and a pair of shoes had been discarded near the body. Oster died of gunshot wounds, and 3 plastic bags had been placed over her head. The last time anyone saw Oster alive was on November 1, 1997, while she was working as a prostitute on East Sprague. She'd been carrying a beige purse, which was not located and which police believe may have been taken as a trophy. On Wednesday, April 1, 1998, the body of 34-year-old Linda A. Mabin was found in the 4800 block of East 14th Avenue, only a short distance from where the bodies of Laurel Wason and Shawn McClenahan were found the previous December. Similar to Wason and McClenahan, Mabin's body had been covered with vegetation that did not grow in that area and consisted of many of the same species previously found there, bolstering the investigative theory that perhaps the plant material had been brought from the perpetrator's home. Mabin's body was fully clothed, and there were remnants of plastic bags in the area of her head. The body was badly decomposed, and animals had disturbed it. It was obvious that it had been there for some time. The animal damage and degree of decomposition fit the time Mabin was last seen, which may have been on November 21, 1997, when she'd been contacted by a police officer on East Sprague. It was possible that she'd been seen the following night, but that couldn't be confirmed. She was reported missing on November 29, 1997, by a Spokane County Health District employee that works with prostitutes. The fact that Mabin's body was found in such close proximity to where Wason's and McClenahan's bodies were found prompted investigators to believe that the killer was using the site as a cluster dump site. However, an exhaustive search of the area failed to turn up any additional bodies. Additional investigation showed that Mabin was known to use illicit drugs, particularly crack cocaine. Acquaintances told the police that she usually carried a pipe for smoking crack tucked inside her pants in her pelvic region. However, the pipe wasn't found. Only a folded paper towel was recovered from this area of her body. She was also known to carry a velvet drawstring bag, like that sold with Crown Royal whiskey, but this too was missing from her body. On Tuesday, July 7, 1998, a white female body was found in a vacant lot near 218 North Crest Line in Spokane. It was subsequently identified as that of Michelin J. Durning, 47, who had a history of prostitution and was last seen on July 4, 1998, in Spokane. Durning's body had been covered with grass. A piece of styrofoam and 2 hot tub covers also covered her, which, the detectives determined, had come from a pile of debris in the vacant lot. Durning's body was nude, and her lower denture, engraved with her name, was missing from her mouth. The cause of death was gunshot wounds, and a toxicology examination revealed the presence of methamphetamine in her body. On Tuesday, October 13, 1998, the body of 35-year-old Connie L. Ellis, also known as Connie L. LaFontaine, was found in the vicinity of the 1700 block of 108th Street South in Tacoma. When the Pierce County Sheriff's Department responded, they found that the body was badly decomposed, had 3 plastic bags placed over the head, and the victim had sustained a gunshot wound to the head. A 9mm caliber bullet was found at the scene, but a follow-up investigation revealed that Ellis carried a small gun capable of firing a 9mm bullet, prompting the investigators to believe that the bullet found at the scene had belonged to Ellis and not her killer. Ellis's gun was not found. Like all the others, Ellis was known to be involved in prostitution and drug usage. Because of the ongoing investigations of murdered prostitutes in several counties that were obviously linked to the Spokane serial killer, who was clearly traveling across the state to carry out his murders, Pierce County detectives promptly notified the Spokane cops of their discovery. The discovery of Ellis's body brought the official body count attributed to the Spokane serial killer to 17. There were likely many others that were not yet found or linked to the elusive killer. Firearm examination evidence from the cases of Nikki Lowe and Kathy Bribois, conducted by Galen Warren of the Columbia International Forensic Laboratory, showed that those 2 cases were without question related. It was Warren's opinion that the same .22 caliber weapon, most likely a handgun, killed Lowe and Bribois. Warren further determined that Sherry Palmer had been shot to death with a .32 caliber firearm, which, in his opinion, was most likely a semi-automatic pistol. The Washington State Patrol Crime Lab examined ballistics evidence in the case of Patricia Barnes, and the .22 caliber bullets found in her body had been too badly damaged from passing through tissue and bone, and had been rendered useless for comparisons under a microscope. Although it was possible, even likely, that the bullets had been fired from the same gun that was used to kill Lowe, Joseph, and Bribois, their uselessness made it impossible to conclusively make that determination. Similarly, the firearms evidence in the Zielinski case, as well as several of the other cases, was deemed inadequate for comparison with other bullets and bullet fragments recovered from the other victims. Although forensic scientist Ed Robinson of the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory determined that Zielinski had been shot with a .25 caliber weapon, most likely a semi-automatic pistol, he was unable to determine whether any of the other victims that had been shot with a .25 caliber weapon had been shot with the same gun. Robinson was able to determine that Magtech, a brand that had limited availability within the state, manufactured the bullets recovered from Zielinski's body. The firearms evidence in the Hernandez, Wason, Mabin, Johnson, McClenahan, Oster, and Ellis cases showed that the victims had been shot with a .25 caliber weapon, most likely a semi-automatic pistol. Ballistics comparison of the bullets from each of those cases showed that all the bullets had been fired from the same gun, with the exception of the bullets recovered from the bodies of Hernandez and Ellis. The bullets recovered from Hernandez's and Ellis's bodies had similar characteristics as the bullets recovered from the other aforementioned cases, but they couldn't be linked conclusively as having been fired from the same gun. It was pointed out to the investigators that the ammunition used in the Hernandez case was identified as Magtech brand, the same brand of bullet that was used to kill Zielinski. But the bullets used in the Ellis case were of a different brand, similar to Remington or Winchester. The firearms evidence in the Mercer case was compared with the evidence from the other cases. The bullets were determined to be Magtech brand again, and it was determined that the bullets that killed Mercer were fired from the same gun that killed several of the other victims. The firearms evidence in the Durning murder included a .25 caliber CCI brand cartridge case that matched general characteristics of those found in the Mercer case, indicating that Mercer and Durning had been killed by bullets fired from the same gun. However, the evidence linking those 2 cases only bore similarities, and it was not conclusively shown that bullets fired from the same gun had in fact killed both women. The detectives learned that the hair and fiber evidence found on and around each of the victims' bodies came from a wide variety of sources. For instance, cat hair, deer or elk hair, and foreign human hair were found on Sapp's body. Similarly, human hair not belonging to the victim was found on Lowe's body, and cat and foreign brown human hair were found on Briboise's body. Cat hair was found in McClenahan's bra, and black and burgundy dyed animal hair was recovered from Barnes's body. One mongoloid pubic hair and one negroid body hair were also found on Barnes's body. Several short, light brown Caucasian head hairs were found on the blue towel recovered with Asian victim Jennifer Joseph's body. In addition to the hair evidence, a variety of acrylic and acetate fibers of varying colors were also found on the victims' bodies. Specimens taken during autopsy from the orifices and cavities of Scott, Johnson, Wason, McClenahan, Mercer, Durning, and Ostler revealed the presence of human sperm, as did the condom recovered from Mabin. DNA typing of the sperm evidence showed that it belonged to the same person. Although in many of the cases the bodies were too decomposed to obtain usable samples, the DNA typing was a major breakthrough that would enable the investigators to conclusively link several of the murders to a single suspect, once, of course, a suspect was apprehended, and samples of his blood were obtained for purposes of comparison. Since it's common knowledge that prostitutes are normally paid for their services in advance, each of the victims in this case should have had at least some money on their person at the time of their deaths. The fact that none of them did, coupled with the fact that purses, identification, and wallets were also missing, indicated that each woman had been robbed either before or after being murdered. On Tuesday, November 10, 1998, the Spokane serial killer task force operatives were out in numbers as they had been for some time now. It had been less than a month since Connie Ellis had been killed on the other side of the state, and based on the killer's prior activities, the cops knew that it would only be a matter of time before he struck again. It was 1:25 a.m. when Spokane officers observed a man driving a silver 1985 Honda Civic, Washington license plate identification 918AJH, pull over and pick up known prostitute Jennifer Robinson on the corner of First and Crestline, another area of Spokane well known to be frequented by working prostitutes. The officer identified the driver of the Honda Civic as Robert L. Yates, Jr., and his encounter that evening would be the second time his name came up during the task force investigation. When Yates was confronted by the police officer, he told the officer that he'd been instructed by Jennifer Robinson's father to drive to the area, find his daughter, and bring her home. With Robinson acknowledging that she knew Yates, there was little that the officer could do. Unable to hold either one of them, the officer took a field report of the incident, which made its way to the task force. Robinson probably didn't realize it at the time, but she was one of the lucky ones. As the investigation into the prostitute murders slid forward into 1999, task force detectives became aware of a report that had been filed on August 1, 1998. According to the report, 30-year-old Christine L. Smith had been the victim of an assault and robbery while working as a prostitute on East Sprague. According to what Smith told the police, she'd been picked up by a date near East 124 Short Street, driving a 70s model black van with orange coloring on the passenger side exterior. She described the van as having dark brown vinyl seats with a wood-framed bed with a mattress in the back. She described the driver as a white man, approximately 50 years old, about 5 foot 10 inches tall, 175 pounds, with a medium build. She said that he had sandy blonde hair, average length, with no facial hair and a somewhat pockmarked face. She said that her date didn't seem nervous, nor did he smell of alcohol or act drunk, things that she said she normally notices about her customers. After negotiating a price for her services, she told her date to drive to a parking lot behind a clinic on East 400 5th Street. While en route to the location, the date told her that he was a helicopter pilot with the National Guard. Smith said that she asked the man if he was a psycho killer, and he'd responded that he wasn't. He told her that he had 5 kids and would not do something like that. After arriving in the parking lot, the man paid her $40 for oral sex. They went to the rear of the van and got onto the raised mattress, where the man pulled down his pants and she performed oral sex on him for approximately 5 to 7 minutes. During the entire time, she said, his penis did not become erect. At one point, after the 5 to 7 minute period, the man hit her over the head with something, but she wasn't sure what he hit her with. The blow nearly caused her to lose consciousness. She fell backward and struggled to keep her senses intact. The man told her to return his money to him, but she struggled to find a door handle for the sliding side door. To her horror, she couldn't find one. She made her way to the front of the van, all the while trying to retrieve the money the man had given her from her pants pocket. With blood dripping from her head, she made it to the front seat area and out the passenger door. Fleeing for her life, Smith made it to nearby St. Luke's Rehabilitation Center, where she obtained assistance from a security guard. The guard gave her a ride to Sacred Heart Hospital, where she received 3 stitches to close a half-inch long wound above and behind her left ear. After leaving the hospital, she contacted the police and provided the details of what had happened to her. Upon follow-up, Smith was unable to provide task force detectives with an identification of the suspect that had attacked her. As the investigation moved forward day by day and month by month, the task force detectives became more convinced that Yates was their man. He fit the general identification of the suspect who had attacked Smith, including age and appearance, right down to the pockmarked face. He drove a white Corvette and a Honda Civic, and they learned he was a member of the Washington National Guard and served in the capacity of a helicopter pilot. On Tuesday, September 14, 1999, one of the task force detectives paid a visit to the Yates home, located at 2220 East 49th in Spokane. Yates was either not at home or was unavailable, and the detective left a message for Yates to contact Detective Marvin Hill as soon as possible. Yates complied and contacted Hill the same day, and arrangements were made for him to meet with Hill and other detectives, including David Bentley, the following day at the Public Safety Building. When Yates showed up, detectives greeted him in the lobby. They immediately noticed that he had light brown hair and observed that he was sweating profusely. After being taken into an interrogation room, the detectives advised him that his name had surfaced in connection with the serial murder investigation. They told him that he was not being considered a suspect at that point, that he didn't have to answer any questions, and that he was free to leave at any time. Yates acknowledged that he understood. Yates was first questioned about the contact he'd made with the girl and the police on November 10, 1998, and he basically repeated the same story that he told the police officer that stopped him, namely that he'd been instructed to pick up the girl after being asked to do so by her father. It was a fairly common story that Johns typically tell police when they've been caught picking up a prostitute, and the detectives told him so. Nevertheless, Yates stuck with the story. When asked to recall the girl's name, he had difficulty doing so, but said he thought her name was Jennifer. When he was asked her father's name, he told the detectives that he couldn't remember it. When asked how he knew Jennifer Robinson's father, he claimed that they'd worked together for a short time. As he continued responding to their questions, Yates claimed that he drove the young woman to her home, which he said was about 2 blocks off of Mission Avenue. The detectives bluntly confronted Yates by telling him that they didn't believe his story. They also told him that acts of prostitution, drugs, and other minor offenses were not important to their inquiry, and that there'd be no consequences regarding him if he made any admissions regarding such acts. However, they stressed that the impetus of their investigation centered on the murders that had been committed, and told him that lying to them would only arouse additional suspicion towards him as a suspect. When they told him that contacting the girl's father could easily check his story about Jennifer, he maintained that he told them the truth. When asked about the earlier traffic infraction on September 24, 1997, in which he'd been stopped by the police while driving a white Corvette, he claimed that he'd made an abrupt lane change to avoid colliding with a bus. He claimed that he'd been on his way to work at a business called Pantrol, located on East Riverside in Spokane, and admitted to having owned the white Corvette, but had since sold it to a friend. When asked about any other vehicles he drove or owned, Yates said that he owned a silver 1985 Honda Civic and a dark blue 1985 Honda Accord. He said that he had access to vehicles at work, but drove them sparingly and never took them home with him. Next, they asked him about any contact he might have had with prostitutes. Yates said that there was one occasion in the autumn of 1998 in which he'd picked up a female hitchhiker because it was very cold outside. When she got into his car, she propositioned him, at which time, he said, he dropped her off about a mile from where he'd picked her up. He said that he'd not been involved with any other prostitutes in Spokane, but admitted that he had hired prostitutes in Germany several years earlier while serving in the military. Yates was then asked if he'd voluntarily provide a sample of his blood to the detectives to help eliminate him as a suspect. He stated that he wanted to discuss the issue with his wife first, and he'd call them with his decision. He then left the building, but called back later to say that he'd not be providing the requested blood sample. The father of 4 daughters and a son, Robert Yates Jr. led a relatively ordinary and unremarkable life that was characterized by exemplary military service. Yates grew up on Whidbey Island, Washington, where his mother died while he was still in high school. Records show that he was allegedly repeatedly sexually abused by an older neighbor boy when he was approximately 6 years old, and it isn't clear whether he received psychiatric help or counseling. Following graduation from high school, he enrolled at Walla Walla College, but dropped out after only 2 years. In 1975, he obtained a job as a guard at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, where he worked for only 6 months. The following year, he married a young woman named Linda and later enlisted in the Army, where he served his country for 19 years as a helicopter pilot, opting to leave less than a year before becoming eligible for retirement benefits. He flew an OH-58D Kiowa, the type of helicopter that the Army uses for reconnaissance missions. Yates served in Germany, participated in Desert Storm, served in relief efforts after the devastation of Hurricane Andrew, and flew on a UN peacekeeping mission to Somalia. In addition to holding a military pilot's license, Yates was also rated commercially to fly transport planes and helicopters. During his military service, Yates received a number of distinguished awards and medals, including 3 Meritorious Service Medals, 3 Army Commendation Medals, 3 Army Achievement Medals, and 2 Armed Forces Expeditionary Medals. After receiving an honorable discharge, Yates went to work for an aluminum smelter. He also joined the Washington National Guard. While serving in the National Guard, Yates attained the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 4 and was the only commander the Guard had east of the Cascade Mountains for the OH-58 Kiowa Scout helicopter, making him a valuable commodity, so to speak. He was characterized by his fellow guardsmen and guardswomen as a true professional who was very proficient in his job. He was also characterized as brave, and it became well known that he scouted hostile territory, often drawing enemy fire, while serving in Somalia. While investigating Yates's background, the task force detectives discovered that there was a period of 1 year, from the spring of 1997 to the spring of 1998, that Yates was grounded and not allowed to fly pending the processing of medical evaluations. The period in which he was grounded was when many of the prostitutes were murdered, prompting detectives to speculate on whether his being grounded might have served as a trigger to reignite his murderous impulses. Such a correlation, however, was never proven. As the investigation unfolded, Yates's wife, Linda, came forward with information that Yates came home after being out most of the night. There was considerable blood in the rear of the van, she said. According to what Linda told the detectives, Yates had taken his daughter to work around 11 p.m., but didn't return home until 6:30 the next morning. When she opened the door of the house for him, he came inside and retrieved cleaning supplies to clean up the back of the vehicle. The rear of the van, she said, contained a fold-down bed. Linda told the detectives that Yates had told her that he'd hit a dog that had jumped in front of him while driving toward home, and he'd stopped and placed it in the back of the van and had taken it to a veterinarian. On the way, she said he'd told her that the dog bled all over the cushion. He removed the cushion that morning when he got home, she said, destroyed it, and later replaced it with another one. The day after Yates's interview with the task force detectives, the same detectives contacted Jennifer Robinson. She told the investigators that she remembered the incident involving Yates and the police and stated that she and Yates had reached an agreement for her to perform oral sex on him for $20. She said that when the police stopped them, she instructed Yates to tell the officer the story about her father, which, she said, wasn't true. She said that her father didn't live in Spokane and that he'd never worked with Yates. Now that they determined that Yates had indeed lied to them, the task force detectives considered him an even stronger suspect in the prostitute murders. As such, it was decided that they'd contact the friend to whom Yates had sold the white Corvette. The current Corvette owner told the investigators that she'd purchased the car from Yates in May 1998. The title records check showed that Yates had owned the Corvette from September 8, 1994 through May 7, 1998. During questioning, the new owner said that she recalled that Yates had indicated to her that he'd changed the car's carpeting a year earlier. The owner consented to a search of the vehicle, during which several fiber samples were obtained from various locations throughout the car. The samples were submitted to the Washington State Crime Laboratory for analysis. In the meantime, evidence was uncovered that indicated the Corvette's carpet had been changed twice over a 2-year period while owned by Yates. The detectives considered this unusual unless the carpet was somehow damaged or stained. On January 14, 2000, task force detectives interviewed Yates's former employer at Pantrol, who told them that Yates had a number of vehicles while in Pantrol's employ, including a mid-80s model Ford pickup, possibly a 4-wheel drive, and a van. Although the employer could not recall the van well enough to describe it, he said that Yates got the van shortly before leaving Pantrol in June of 1998. The date that Yates had obtained the van was 2 to 3 months before his encounter with Christine Smith, though one that got away in August 1998. They could only speculate whether the van was the same one that Christine had described her attacker as driving. Why hadn't Yates mentioned either of these vehicles during his interview with the task force detectives? They wondered. On April 5, 2000, forensic scientist Kevin Jenkins told the task force detectives that the fibers recovered from the Corvette closely matched fibers recovered during the Jennifer Joseph murder investigation. One group of fibers, nylon, Jenkins said, was identical both visually and microscopically with regard to color, texture, and shape. Another group of fibers, although lighter and of a slightly different color, were also similar to a fiber recovered during the Joseph investigation. Believing that additional evidence related to the Joseph murder might be found inside the Corvette, the task force obtained a search warrant for the car and impounded it from its current owner for additional testing. Among their findings was a white button in the area of the passenger side floorboard, and they noted that the passenger side seatbelt buckle and attaching device were stained with what appeared to be blood. Looking further, several areas of both the driver's seat and the passenger's seat were swabbed and tested chemically for blood, the tests of which reacted positively. The investigators also found several areas on the passenger side floorboard that appeared to be stained with blood, and they found what appeared to be dried blood stains and flakes of dried blood on the bottom of the passenger seat. The stains in question reacted positively to a chemical test for blood, and DNA was extracted from 3 of the stains. The subsequent DNA profiles matched, indicating that the blood was from a common source, that is, the same person. Blood samples had previously been obtained from Jennifer Joseph's parents, and DNA had been extracted from those samples. Results of the DNA comparisons between the blood from Joseph's parents and the bloodstains found inside the Corvette closely matched, resulting in an extremely high likelihood that the bloodstains inside the Corvette were from a child of the Josephs. Also, the detectives determined that the white button found inside the Corvette, made of white mother-of-pearl, was indistinguishable from a button on the blouse recovered from Jennifer Joseph's body. The detectives also learned that Yates had 5 children, just like what Christine Smith had told them. Yates was their man. There was no longer any doubt about that. On Tuesday, April 18, 2000, Robert L. Yates Jr. was arrested for the murder of Jennifer Joseph. A search warrant executed at the time of his arrest enabled authorities to obtain blood samples from Yates, and a subsequent DNA analysis was found to match the DNA profiles of sperm samples taken from victims Scott, Johnson, Wason, McClenahan, Mercer, Ostler, Mabin, and Durning. Detectives also went to Yates's home where they noted species of plants that were identical to the vegetation that had covered the bodies of victims Wason, McClenahan, and Mabin. They also found in plain view at his home pieces of broken concrete, wood with white paint peeling from it, peanut shells, and rocks, all of which were present in samples taken from the sites where the aforementioned victims were found and which were used to try to conceal their bodies. They also found several packing peanuts strewn about the yard. On April 25, 2000, a latent fingerprint that had been developed from a plastic bag found on Shawn McClenahan's head was matched to Robert L. Yates Jr. Following Yates's arrest, and after seeing Yates's photo in the Spokesman Review newspaper, task force detectives were contacted again by Christine Smith, who told them that Yates might be the man who attacked her. During the May 12, 2000 interview, Smith told detectives Bentley and Hill that she'd been recently treated at the University of Washington Medical Center for injuries sustained in an automobile accident. It was while being treated for those injuries, she said, that X-rays of her head determined that she was carrying metal fragments within her head. The doctor's reports concluded that she'd probably sustained an old gunshot wound to the left mastoid area, the same area where she thought that her attacker had struck her with an undetermined object. During the interview, Smith told the detectives that she may have been shot instead of struck because she was always wondering about the suddenness and severity of the attack on her. She said that it was possible, even likely, that she'd been mistaken about being struck. Although she was unable to positively identify Yates from a photo lineup as the man who'd attacked her, she said that he looked like the man who had assaulted her. At another point following Yates's arrest, the detectives located and seized a number of vehicles that Yates had previously owned, including a 1979 Ford van. The van in question was black in color, with an orange and yellow stripe on the passenger side exterior, which had been painted over with black paint. The van had bucket seats and a raised bed-like platform in the rear covered in carpet. Numerous stains were found inside the van that reacted positively to chemicals used to identify blood. Detectives also found a spent Magtech .25 caliber bullet casing, the same brand and caliber of ammunition used in the murder of Johnson, Wason, McClenahan, Oster, Mabin, Ellis, and Mercer. They also found a spent bullet in the roof track above the windshield. Yates, now 48, was charged with 8 counts of first-degree murder in the shooting deaths of Spokane area prostitutes and was suspected in the deaths of as many as 18 women, possibly even more. He was also charged with first-degree attempted murder and first-degree burglary in connection with the assault on Christine Smith. He was held without bond and initially pleaded not guilty to all of the charges. Yates was subsequently charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in Pierce County for the slayings of Connie LaFontaine Ellis and Melinda Mercer. He pleaded not guilty in those murders as well. Prosecutors in both jurisdictions indicated that they'd seek the death penalty against Yates. There was yet another murder that Yates was suspected of committing, that of 43-year-old Melody Murfin. Murfin, a known drug addict, was last seen on May 20th, 1998. Because of her profile, Yates was a prime suspect in her disappearance and murder, but there was no body and no evidence that linked Yates to Murfin. However, that soon changed. On Monday, April 16, 2000, faced with the insurmountable evidence against him and the almost certainty of receiving the death penalty if convicted of the charges against him, Yates, through his attorneys, announced that he was ready to strike a deal. In exchange for receiving life in prison, Yates said that he was willing to plead guilty to 13 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of attempted first-degree murder, but would not plead guilty to the charges facing him in Pierce County. He also said that he would lead the cops to Melody Murfin's body. After prosecutors agreed to the terms of his offer, Yates sketched out a map of the yard of his home on a yellow legal pad. Detectives spent about 2 hours digging up portions of the yard of Yates's former home before they found what they were looking for. They found Melody Murfin's remains buried about 8 inches below the surface in a bark-covered flower bed near what used to be the Yates's bedroom window, approximately 1 foot away from the house's foundation. 2 weeks later, Yates kept his word and pleaded guilty to 13 of the murders that the task force had been investigating. At his sentencing, Melody Murfin's daughter, Anne, made the following courtroom statement to Yates. "My name is Anne, and I'm also the daughter of Melody Murfin. And I would just like to say that everyone says this is a closure and that this is what's going to make us feel better in the end. However, my mother made bad choices, but that never made her a bad person. Yates made bad choices, and that makes him a terrible person. And the plea bargain, I'm grateful that I now know that my mother is never coming back to me. As soon as she doesn't get to be a part of me, I don't think you should be able to get to be a part of any part of your family. How could you do that to us? How could you take my mother and bury her in your yard? And your family walks around my mother for 2.5 years. You stole her soul. I don't think you ever deserve to see daylight, ever see your family. You must be tormented in prison for the rest of your life. Tortured. You're a sick monster, and you will be judged. That's all I have to say." Before his sentence was meted out, Yates claimed that he felt remorse for the crimes he'd committed. He said the following amid hissing and jeers in the courtroom. "I've taken away the love, the compassion, and the tenderness of your loved ones, and left in that place grief and bitterness. In my struggle to overcome my guilt and shame, I've turned to God. I hope that God will replace your sorrow with peace." Yates was then sentenced to 408 years in prison for one of the worst murder sprees in U.S. history. On September 19, 2002, Yates was convicted of those murders and subsequently sentenced to death by lethal injection on October 3, 2002. And the story could have ended right here. But in 2012, Donna Perry, born Douglas Perry, allegedly confessed to his cellmate to killing 9 prostitutes. Out of those 9, 3 were in Yates's bag: Yolanda Sapp, Nikki Lowe, and Kathleen Bribois. Perry shot all 3 of them during a 4-month period in 1990. On July 24, 2007, Perry was sentenced to 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. He's currently detained at the Washington Correction Center for Women in Gig Harbor, Washington. Yates remains incarcerated at the Washington State Penitentiary, but his death sentence was commuted to life in prison without the possibility of parole in 2015, after the Washington State Supreme Court ruled in 2018 that the death penalty violated the state constitution. He is now 71 years old.
Tiffany Schultz was spotted sunbathing in a bikini one morning, just inside the door of her apartment on the 2nd floor of the Canyon Ridge complex. It was January 12, 1990, and the 21-year-old was in a position to see the recreation center, shared with the residents of the Buena Vista Gardens apartment complex across the street. She called a friend and spoke on the phone for half an hour. Just as she ended that call, an African-American man approached the Canyon Ridge manager, Dorothy Curtis, to request a hanger. He needed it, he said, to unlock his car, parked out on the street. She gave him the hanger, but then watched him walk toward the complex, rather than back to the street. This concerned her. Residents who lived below Tiffany would later report that between 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., they'd heard loud noises from the apartment overhead. They also reported the sound of running water, and what they believed was someone being beaten. Tiffany didn't leave her apartment that anyone saw, but she did not pick up the phone when a friend called her around 12:30 that afternoon. Her roommate arrived home later in the day and found Tiffany's lifeless body in her bedroom, lying face up, clad only in bikini bottoms. Her left leg was extended under the bed, and her right leg was posed at a 60-degree angle. There was blood on her crotch and torso, especially around her left chest area. A pathologist would later count 47 separate stab wounds, nearly half of which clustered around her breast. There were punctures going so deep, they went all the way through the body. The other 2 areas that had sustained an attack were her neck and upper right thigh. From bruises, it was evident that the perpetrator had also smacked her across the face with something, as if to beat her into submission. The police who arrived found no sign of forced entry, although there was blood on the doorknobs, and despite a seemingly erotic frenzy of stabbing, the victim was not sexually assaulted. The officers surmised that the intruder had left by way of the balcony, leaping from the 2nd floor to the ground. On Tiffany's hand, they'd found hair strands and managed to lift some skin samples for genetic testing. The first obvious suspect was Tiffany's boyfriend, so he was arrested and interrogated. However, with no evidence to hold him, within days of his arrest, he was released. Nothing else turned up to implicate him, so he was eventually dropped as a viable suspect. Since Tiffany worked part-time as an exotic dancer, investigators thought perhaps someone had followed her home. No one yet realized that this was the first of several such assaults in the area. The next one occurred about a month later. Janine Weinhold also rented a 2nd-floor apartment, residing at the Buena Vista Gardens apartment complex. She and her female roommate were students at the University of California, San Diego. On February 16th, Janine drove her roommate to work around 9 a.m., arranging to pick her up later that afternoon. But she did not show up. She said she was returning to the apartment and had mentioned no plans to go elsewhere, so it seemed strange that she not only did not show up but also failed to answer the phone when the roommate called. Such behavior was uncharacteristic of her. A neighbor who lived below Janine saw a black man on the stairs around 11:30 that morning. He was just sitting there, his face in his hands, and she thought he looked quite unhappy. Not long afterward, she heard loud noises in Janine's apartment overhead, but when the noises stopped, she went back to what she was doing. It was not until evening, around 8 p.m., that Janine's roommate finally came home. Having heard nothing from Janine all day, she was worried. She soon learned she had good reason to be. The front door was locked, so she let herself in. Then she found Janine's body. The dead woman lay on the floor of her bedroom, naked except for her bra. It appeared that her clothing had been stripped off her, and it lay nearby, inside out. One leg was spread, and there were multiple stab wounds to her chest. Over the right breast was a small cluster of deep wounds. The roommate immediately called the police. When they searched the apartment, they found what looked like a small honeycomb pattern left in blood on the door handle. They also discovered a blood-stained knife in the kitchen sink with the tip bent. Although it was clearly the murder weapon, it belonged to the occupants. With no sign of forced entry, investigators assumed that Janine had either invited her attacker in, or he had knocked, and then pushed his way in when she answered the door, although no one reported hearing her scream. The woman who lived below her described the loud noises she'd heard, which helped the police to place the attack around noon, and the condition of her body supported that estimate. Janine had been sexually assaulted, so a semen sample was sent to the lab for DNA analysis. This technology had only been in use for the past 3 years and was both time-consuming and expensive, but as the case progressed, an analysis was clearly merited. Semen was also collected from Janine's jogging outfit, the bedspread, and the carpet. No one who knew the victim could think of anyone who might wish to harm her, so the attack appeared to have been a stranger assault. The black man on the stairs seemed to be a crucial piece to the puzzle, but no one knew who he was or why he'd been there. Residents in this complex remained alert, but that didn't stop other attacks. A month passed, and another woman reported a disturbing incident in the same apartment complex. Anna Cotolessa Ritchie also lived on the second floor. Around noon on March 25th, she left her apartment to walk to a nearby store. On her way there, she saw a black man standing at a bus stop, but as she returned, she noticed he was no longer there. Assuming a bus had come by and picked him up, she returned home. But then she saw him again, coming toward her. He passed her, and she hurried home. As she rushed up the steps and inserted her key into her apartment door, she heard a noise at the bottom of the steps. When she stepped over to look, she realized the man from the bus stop had followed her. He stared up at her and then bent down to tie his shoe. She saw that he was feigning because his shoes were both already tied, so she went into her apartment and locked the door. Certain she barely escaped something evil, she listened for a while. Nothing happened, and she believed he'd left. She would have cause to remember him later. She was the lucky one. The following month, this same man again followed a woman home, and this time, he succeeded with his fatal agenda. Clearly, he stalked his victims, watching for the opportune moment. 18-year-old Holly Tarr lived in Michigan, but she was visiting her brother at the Buena Vista Gardens apartment complex that April with her friend Tammy. They were seniors in high school, and Holly, a talented violinist, had been accepted at the University of Michigan for college on a music scholarship. It was her spring break, and she and Tammy had decided to spend it in California. Late on the morning of April 3rd, they played tennis in the recreation area and then went to lie out at the pool. Through a window, they saw an African-American man wearing a red t-shirt and lifting weights. He looked to be in his late 20s. He apparently saw them as well and kept an eye on their movements. Around noon, Holly returned alone to the apartment to take a shower. Tammy stayed in the pool for 10 more minutes and then went to the apartment. She thought she heard Holly scream inside, but when she tried to open the door, she found it locked. Inside, a telephone rang, but no one answered. Knocking hard, she called out, "Holly?" Concerned when there was no answer, she kept knocking. Finally, Tammy went to a neighbor to ask for help, and that person called for a member of the maintenance staff who arrived to open the door. He used a master key but found the chain on, so he exerted enough force to break it. Tammy ran in just as the man they'd seen working out emerged from a bedroom. He held a white cloth over his face and had a long knife in his hand. He stumbled and fell onto the couch, but then jumped up and fled. Tammy entered the bedroom and found Holly, still alive and gasping. She had been stabbed once through the chest, a wound so severe that she died before help arrived. Tammy noticed that an opal ring that Holly had worn that morning was gone from her finger. Holly had been attacked and left on the floor, apparently with the intent of a sexual assault, as her legs were spread. She wore panties and a bra, and a towel she'd used after her shower lay on top of her. Her clothing was bloody, and the knife had been thrust deep into her heart. The police were called at once. Officers arrived to close off the crime scene, and they quickly located several key pieces of evidence. A shoe print near the door was clearly that of a male athletic shoe, a Nike Air Jordan, and it did not match any from Holly's brother's closet. A bloody impression from a knife was lifted from the door jamb, and a t-shirt and blood-stained knife were found dumped in a parking lot outside. The knife had come from the apartment, and blood on the shirt would prove to be from Holly. In response to Tammy's description of what she had witnessed, detectives checked the sign-in sheet of the weight room. Both girls' names were on it, as was Holly's brother and one more name, C. Prince. They soon learned the full name, Cleophus Prince, Jr. Within a day, the police had located Prince and asked him about his presence at the apartment complex. He said that he'd worked out until around noon, and then went back to his apartment to get ready for work. He left at 10 minutes to 2 in the afternoon. He refused to be fingerprinted, and since there was no definite evidence against him, the police could not arrest him. At this time, Prince shared an apartment with Robert and Robin Romo. That April, he told them that he'd been on a date with a woman, adding that he had raped her afterward. He'd made her cry and then raped her again. When Robin told him about the recent murder at the Buena Vista Gardens complex, he said he had seen the victim at the pool that morning. Prince's friends did not realize he'd done more than see her. Shortly thereafter, Prince moved out. After that, no one was killed in the Buena Vista Gardens complex. But the attacks did not stop. They just changed location. In the early afternoon of May 2nd, a woman named Leslie was out on the beach near a home she was visiting. She walked back to the house and saw an African-American man standing at the door. She asked what he wanted, and he told her he'd once lived in the house. Then he walked away. She went inside, and to her surprise, that same man pushed his way in after her. He placed a hand over her mouth as they struggled, but she managed to get away from him. She ran from the house, screaming, and he followed her. When he saw he couldn't catch her, he ran another way. Less than 3 weeks later, this same man took greater care to make sure he completed his attack. This time he entered the home of Alyssa Keller, 38, who lived with her 18-year-old daughter at the Top of the Hill apartment complex. The daughter was away, but she spoke with her mother on the evening of May 20th. However, Alyssa did not go to work the next morning or answer the phone, so her daughter went to see if she was all right. She discovered her mother on the bedroom floor, under a blanket. The daughter called the police. The coroner found that Alyssa had been dead between 6 and 12 hours. She had been stabbed, and there was a cluster of wounds on her chest, 9 in all. She had also been beaten in the face as well as choked, and there was evidence on her hands of defensive wounds. Her blood-stained underwear lay next to her body, turned inside out. Investigators believed that the intruder had entered through a window left partially open, leaving scuff marks there and a shoe print on the floor nearby. Bloody marks on the bathroom counter bore a peculiar pattern as well, which might serve to help make a match if a suspect were to be found. It was the same honeycomb pattern that they had encountered at several earlier murder scenes. The daughter let them know that her mother had worn a ring adorned with a gold nugget that was now missing from her hand. Police put out the word to pawn shops hoping it would turn up. Later that summer at the same apartment complex, an apartment was burglarized and money was taken, both in the form of American and Italian currency. However, before that occurred, there was another murder, this time in a private home. On September 13th, Pamela Clarkson, 42, left home around 8 a.m. to go to the Family Fitness Center on Miramar Road. Her husband left shortly thereafter, but their daughter, 18-year-old Amber, was still in bed. Their home was in University City, a neighborhood of San Diego. Around mid-morning, a neighbor heard Amber having words with someone inside the home, and then heard a male voice. Amber cried out, but there was nothing more, so there seemed little reason to be alarmed. Pamela drove in around 11 o'clock, but later that day she failed to show up for work. A phone call to the home was not answered, so a colleague decided to go over to find out if Pamela was all right. It was this woman who came across her body in the entryway of the home. Pamela was on her back, nude, with her arms spread out at 90-degree angles to her body. She had been repeatedly stabbed, with 11 deep wounds to the upper left chest area. From blood trails on the floor, it appeared that she had been stabbed elsewhere and dragged to this location. Near her head lay a bloody knife. The woman called the police and they discovered the second victim, Amber. She lay on the floor in a bedroom. While she wore clothing, her breasts had been exposed, and she too had exactly 11 deep wounds in a cluster to her upper chest. However, blood from her wounds had been smeared onto her torso. Apparently she was killed first and Pamela second. Another knife lay on the bathroom floor. A search inside Pamela's purse revealed that money had been taken. Although robbery hardly seemed like motive for this double homicide, it was more like an afterthought. Her wedding ring was gone as well. Looking for a point of entry, police found a screen removed from a dining room window. The sliding door also had marks on it that appeared to have been made by a tool. There were shoe prints from a male athletic shoe under the dining room window. While not initially linked to the other murders, it would not take long before detectives were certain they had a serial killer with a stabbing fetish in the San Diego area. Reporters clamored for an arrest, and residents were terrified by this latest set of intruder homicides. At the height of the investigation, the task force consisted of 27 detectives, 5 sergeants, 1 lieutenant, and a police captain. A city councilman, whose district included Clairemont, told reporters he was fielding some 300 to 400 calls a day from concerned citizens. He went to meet with some people and found that they were in a state of terror. Home entry was an unusual method for a serial killer, although Richard Ramirez had done something similar in Los Angeles and San Francisco less than a decade before. America's Most Wanted ran a show about the string of murders, asking anyone with information to come forward. A truck driver was detained for a while, as was a black man who fit the description, but neither panned out. Strangely enough, the killer had given plenty of clues to people who knew him, but none of them provided information to help with an arrest. In fact, the police already knew him. Around this time, Cleophus Prince told friends he was dating an older white woman, a massage therapist. He had a wedding ring he said was hers, and he added that he was having sex with the woman's daughter as well. He told the same story to the foreman at the job where he was working, Nakam Communications, where he installed underground cable. Prince even offered the foreman several pieces of jewelry. He made the same offer to a co-worker and reiterated that he was dating a mother-daughter combination and that the mother, who worked out, had a great body. At this time, he was committing burglaries in the area, taking a 16-year-old boy with him. His MO was to put socks on his hands so he would not leave fingerprints, and he tripped the door locks with credit cards. Then he would select a knife from the kitchen in case he needed to use it. He often followed women from the gym where he had a membership and thus learned where they lived. Then he'd watch their homes for the chance to enter and take something. His burglary partner did not know about his other activities, but his girlfriend was apparently the recipient of several pieces of stolen jewelry. A number of people witnessed Prince driving away from apartments that had been burglarized, driving an older model bluish-gray vehicle with a noisy muffler. The police soon traced it to someone who came to the family fitness center on Miramar Road. They asked employees to inform them the next time they spotted a car of this description. They hit pay dirt on February 4th, 1991, when an employee called to say a man had just driven a 1982 Chevy Cavalier through the parking lot. The driver, Prince, was sitting there in his car when officers arrived 15 minutes later. He gave a reason for his presence there that failed to check out, so they placed him under arrest. Bringing this killer to ground, however, was not going to be easy. Officers searched his car and found black leather gloves and wool gloves, along with a knife with an 8-inch blade, a steak knife, and 2 folding knives of different sizes. He had once been listed as a member of the fitness center but had canceled his membership. He had no business being in the parking lot, although people at the club said they had seen him there multiple times. That made him look suspicious. Police took fingerprints and a blood sample, questioned Prince, and released him. It would take several weeks to get results, and they had nothing with which to detain him. Prince quickly left the state, supposedly to go visit his mother in Birmingham, Alabama. He would soon get himself into trouble there, fortunately for the task force. Prince's biological samples were sent to Cellmark Diagnostic, a DNA analysis center in Maryland. Along with them went samples and items from some of the crime scenes. 3 weeks later, the police learned that there was a match between Prince and the semen samples from the Weinhold murder. It was time to make an arrest. But when officers went to Prince's last known address, which turned out to be next door to the building where the 4th victim was killed, they learned he was gone. Nevertheless, they searched the apartment, turning up an opal ring that matched the description of the one removed from Holly Tarr when she was stabbed. They learned that only 63 such rings had been manufactured, and none had been distributed in California. That was good evidence against Prince. They got a tip on where he'd gone and alerted the police in that jurisdiction. Prince was up to his usual tricks, according to the Union Tribune. He'd just been arrested on March 1st for burglary. He allegedly took money from a cash register at a dance club and had been released on bond. 3 hours later, the Birmingham police learned about San Diego's interest in him. They contacted Prince's bondsman to find out where he was. They then alerted Prince to turn himself in. Surprisingly, he came in, accompanied by his parents. They gave statements to reporters that his cooperation was clear evidence that he was innocent. He was detained for extradition to California. At this time, the police had only linked 5 murders to him. A background check indicated that he had lived at the Buena Vista Garden Apartments during the time of those murders, and that he was dating a woman who lived near Universal City at the time of those 2 murders. The shoes that Prince owned matched several of the footprint impressions found at the scenes. Then, searches turned up another item that had belonged to a victim, a unique ring that matched the one missing from Alyssa Keller. She was added to the victim list. However, DNA evidence was lacking in some of the cases, so a linkage analysis was in order. Several participants on the task force met with profilers at Quantico, and they went over the evidence in all 6 cases. They were clear on the Weinhold case because semen matched Prince, but if the prosecutor could prove the special circumstance of 6 murders, getting the death penalty for this ruthless killer would be much easier. In fact, the FBI had been involved quite early in this case analysis. FBI profiler John Douglas, then the chief of the Behavioral Sciences Unit, was asked to assist with providing proof, with evidence and psychology, that the 6 cases were related. He wrote about his involvement in Journey into Darkness, in a section about the difference between an offender's method of operation and his signature. Douglas says that former Cuyahoga County prosecutor Tim McGinty, with whom he'd worked on another case, had recommended him to the San Diego police. Special Agent Larry Ankrum, also in the unit, had geographical jurisdiction, so they entered the case together. At this time, there had been only 3 murders, the ones at the Buena Vista Gardens apartment complex. The profilers viewed these crimes as high risk for the offender, since they were perpetrated during the middle of the day, when other residents could have spotted him. Thus, they expected that he was familiar with the apartment complex, and perhaps lived there. He knew how to go about entering apartments and slipping out without being seen, although with the Holly Tarr murder, he'd misjudged and had been accosted while still in the apartment, so he might have a record for breaking and entering. They expected to learn that other women had been approached or accosted in this same area prior to the start of the murders. From what the profilers had learned from interviewing offenders around the country, they expected that this first murder, performed in an area familiar to the offender, probably occurred as the result of a stressful incident in his life. Whatever it was, it would have triggered a desire to punish someone, a woman. His victim would be a stand-in for the person he really wanted to punish. He'd probably hold women accountable for whatever annoyed him, and he would be abusive with his wife or girlfriend as well. He probably gave the items taken from the victims to his wife or girlfriend, secretly delighting in the fact that he'd picked them off a person he'd killed. Doing this would inspire an added sense of control. He might also live in a dependent relationship with a woman, which would make him angry, and he'd have a spotty employment history and issues with authority. Douglas and Ankrum told the task force that they should publicize the list of traits, along with the probability that the offender's behavior would have changed somewhat since the first murder, evident in activities such as greater substance abuse or secrecy. People who knew him might recognize his involvement from behavioral clues and his absence during the times of the murders, and provide helpful information. Since he'd been spotted at this apartment complex, Douglas suggested he'd move on and find victims elsewhere. What Douglas anticipated during the first few months of the murder spree proved to have been correct, as 3 more victims turned up in the next several months at 2 separate scenes. While it was unfortunate that the killer had succeeded 3 more times, it provided more of a basis for analysis. At first, the profilers had only 5 crime scenes, but a 6th would turn up as well. The victims all fit a similar type: white, attractive, and physically fit. Most had been brunette, and 5 had been between 18 and 21. The 42-year-old mother looked much younger, and might also have come into a scene already happening. The killer had entered each residence via an unlocked door or window. All of them had been stabbed, and 5 were killed around the same time of day. All were left face up on the floor of their homes, nude or mostly nude. 3 lived in the same apartment complex, and 3 used the same fitness center. Jewelry was removed from 3 of the victims, but most telling was the way the deepest stab wounds had been concentrated in the chest area, revealing a focused and controlled rage. Only Holly Tarr had a single wound, but that crime had been interrupted. In 5 of the cases, the knife used was from the residence. The profilers utilized the FBI's unique VICAP computer matching database, entering information about the race of the victims, their geographic location, the MO of entering their homes, the use of a knife, the time at which the murders generally occurred, and specifically the signature, the tight circle of puncture wounds left on the chest area. The results of the analysis indicated that there were no other crimes, aside from these 6, anywhere near this area, and none around the country with this particular type of wounding pattern. Douglas explained to a reporter that his method relied on intuitive guesses about a killer's age, educational background, occupation, type of vehicle driven, type of residence, and the possibility of a military background or a psychiatric incarceration. There are both off-site and on-site procedures for profiling, he said. On-site analysis involves going to the crime scene. Off-site requires detailed photographs and reports. Both require data from the crime scene, such as physical evidence, location, accessibility, body position, patterns of evidence, and whether or not a weapon was taken or left at the scene. There are also significant factors that must be established from the crime scene, such as time of the crime, duration, weather conditions, if outside, whether the body was moved, and the social environment around the crime scene. Certain critical factors in a crime scene help to clarify how the offender thinks, and thus, how he directs his behavior. The type of wounds made and evidence of sexual behavior, especially deviant, offer many clues. This includes lab reports from processing evidence, such as toxicology and serology analysis, and autopsy details on the cause of death and sequence of wounds. This also includes police reports, witness statements, and any other avenue of information gathered beyond the actual crime scene. From elements of the crime scene, a profiler can determine some aspects of the offender's behavior that could inspire crime. Whether he has been snubbed or under stress, is unemployed, or might be separated from a significant person, abuses drugs or alcohol, has access to firearms, is physically strong, and possibly served in the military. Did he use surveillance? Did he try to blend in? They studied each aspect of the crime to determine how the offender was thinking about the crime. The profiler was looking for evidence of whether the offender approached the victims with cunning and manipulation, via mere opportunity, or with a blitz type of attack. After getting a victim subdued, the offender's method of keeping her under control was instructive. Did he bind her, kill her right away, allow her to see him, use a drug, or rely on corrective force? Did he use only what force was necessary, or more? In this case, the offender had used overkill, an indication of sexual stimulation from the act of stabbing. An offender's method of perpetrating a crime is indicative of certain aspects of his personality. What he may leave behind is a personal stamp, a behavior that was not necessary to accomplish the crime. An MO may change as the offender learns and perfects his crimes, but his signature tends to remain static. The MO is learned behavior, while the signature arises from personality traits and deviant compulsions. When I start analyzing research into the minds and motivations of serial killers, said Douglas in an interview, I would look for the one element or set of elements that made the crime and criminal stand out, that represented what he was. Considering the differences in the Clairemont area series, the only victim stabbed only once had been followed and subdued via the same MO as in the other crimes. The assault had been interrupted, so it was not clear whether the perpetrator might have continued. In every other way, victim type, time of day, weapon used, it was similar. Only one victim had been sexually assaulted, while only one had been covered after the attack. One victim, the dancer, was higher risk than the others. However, taken all together to determine the links, the similarities outweighed the differences. "There is simply no way," said Douglas, "of coming up with a numerical value for each piece of information. It can be properly evaluated only by running it through the brain of an experienced profiler." Ancrum and Douglas decided that the motive for all 6 murders had been controlled sexual rage. They weren't alone in this interpretation. Former investigator Robert R. Keppel included this series of murders in his book, Signature Killers, because the offender left such a distinct behavioral signature at 5 of the murder scenes. Almost all sex offenders, especially signature killers, Keppel states, need to demonstrate a degree of total control over the victim, whether she's living or dead. They have to. Anger drives them to do it. Although Prince had explained to one of his accomplices in burglary that a stab to the heart was the surest way to kill, Keppel saw the multitude of stab wounds as a form of deviant sexual behavior known as piquerism. That is, Prince enjoyed stabbing and gouging with a sharp implement. In particular, he aimed at the heart and left breast, stabbing deeply many times, more than was necessary to kill. Keppel's signature analysis, which noted both the overkill and the ritual involved, indicated that he was angry and felt a need to control his victims. It was also sexual. He was stimulated by violence, and since only one victim had been raped, Keppel suggests that the knife was a substitute for penile penetration. Keppel believed that Prince was a sadist, having sunk the knife in slowly with satisfaction. In fact, he'd stabbed to the depth of an erect penis. The killer was obsessed with the stimulation of penetrating the victims, Keppel adds. Prince left the knife behind at 3 scenes to show the police his prowess. Keppel indicates that Prince's primary pleasure came from seeing blood flow from a woman's breast. But how did Prince actually measure up? Back then, it was unusual to have a black serial killer, let alone one who crosses racial lines to murder white women. Those who knew Prince well said that he seemed to be obsessed with sex and often bragged about his relationships with white women. Yet, there was no evidence that he'd had an altercation with a white woman that might have made him angry enough to kill. In fact, there was no indication from anything in his entire life history that he'd become a killer. As such, staff writers at the San Diego Union-Tribune penned a long article about how Prince did not fit the psychological profile offered by the FBI when they'd examined the crime scenes. As investigators learned more about Prince, they heard many acquaintances say that he was a polite young man, and that despite growing up in a rough neighborhood in Alabama, the oldest of 8 children, he'd never had a brush with the law and had stayed away from gangs. He'd been an average student who enjoyed sports, had completed high school, and had joined the Navy in 1987, being stationed at the Miramar Naval Air Station. There, he ran into trouble when he stole a postal money order. He received a sentence of nearly a month in the brig, was fined $466, and was eventually discharged in October 1989. But as far as anyone could tell, that had been the extent of his issues with the law, but that was only because he managed to operate surreptitiously. In fact, once he moved to San Diego, he'd been quite busy with thefts and burglaries. His father, Cleophus Prince Sr., also had a criminal record. He'd served time in prison for second-degree murder, which he told reporters had been done in self-defense, and had been arrested after he got out for rape, later reduced to assault. Thus, Prince had a role model. However, both of his parents insisted that the police had the wrong man. Their son, they said, was not capable of murder, let alone serial murder. They were certain he was being framed. In fact, he had shown no anxiety at all, the police had admitted, during the hour and a half he'd been questioned upon his initial arrest. "That crime spree is the work of a psycho person," Prince Sr. was quoted in the San Diego Union-Tribune. "Someone who has no mind to think." He couldn't imagine that his son could do such things. The boy had always been polite and obedient, he insisted. There had to be some mistake. "I imagine he was in the wrong place at the wrong time." Prince's attorney, Roger Appel, claimed that Prince looked nothing like the composite drawing, made from a woman who'd been accosted by a man police believed was also the killer. But the claim that he was the first known serial killer to have crossed racial lines in the hope to show the improbability of the situation was not true. Apparently in California, Prince had gotten a job but was soon laid off, so he'd turned to burglary, which he found easy to accomplish. He enlisted some accomplices and they donned socks to go in and rob homes without leaving fingerprints. Yet the socks were similar in pattern to the bloody honeycomb marks left on doorknobs where murders took place. A history of burglary is often a precursor to rape and murder. In the end, it was physical evidence in one incident and profiling in the others that formed the prosecution's case. When prosecutor Dan Lambourne requested that both Douglas and Ankrum participate in the trial, the court conducted a lengthy pre-trial hearing concerning their qualifications. Douglas was going to take the stand to provide background about the profiling analysis, while Ankrum would specifically address the series of Clairemont area crimes. The defense attorneys protested that they were not psychologists and should not be allowed to make any psychological assessments. The court concluded that the witnesses' experience and training failed to qualify them to express an opinion about the perpetrator's probable state of mind, so that aspect of their testimony was excluded. However, the court accepted that they had sufficient training and experience in crime scene investigation to testify about analyzing the scenes. It was also deemed probable that the jury would not have the requisite knowledge to understand such concepts as signature analysis and linking similar crime scenes, so using an expert to explain it was acceptable. However, because it bordered on psychological motive, they were not allowed to actually use the word signature. The prosecution elected to use only Ankrum, since he had been more extensively involved in the case. The trial, taking place in the summer of 1993, brought out several interesting items, one of which was a biological quirk that had stalled the investigation. Apparently, Prince was a non-secretor, meaning he failed to secrete in his biological fluids a blood enzyme present in 75% of the population. Since the test did not pick it up, the semen analysis from the Weinhold murder erroneously indicated that the offender's blood type was O. Prince's was type A. It took a year to discover and rectify this mistake, which was partially responsible for not initially linking Prince to that incident after his first arrest. Investigators had concentrated on offenders with type O blood, and only later did the DNA analysis help them match Prince definitively to the crime. An expert testified that there was only one chance in 120,000 of a random match. Prince's roommate testified about a night when Prince came back with fresh blood on his jeans to the apartment they shared. He gave a story that he'd gotten into a fight with his girlfriend. However, he'd often bragged about his burglaries and said he'd stabbed some people to death. He recalled Prince talking about stabbing them in the heart. They had lived next door to the building where Alyssa Keller was murdered. This person had even been involved in some of the burglaries, and he testified about wearing socks on their hands. He also recalled the woman's jewelry that Prince had in his possession. When Special Agent Ankrum took the stand, he testified that the same person had slain all 6 victims. His judgment was based on the commonality of the wound pattern and his experience with other such series of crimes. He'd been involved in the case since the second murder, he said, and provided a full history. This included recounting the particular details that linked the cases. Under cross-examination by Prince's attorney, Barton Sheila, Ankrum admitted that he did not get information involving knife attacks on area women who had survived. He also did not get information on murders in other neighborhoods. In fact, there was an unsolved homicide of a white woman stabbed in her home in the San Diego area, committed after Prince was arrested, and Ankrum had not examined it. However, Judge Charles Hayes limited this discussion and called for a closed session, since allowing details to be made public could adversely affect that particular investigation. In closing, Deputy D.A. Lambourne made the case that Prince was a sexual pervert who enjoyed watching blood flow from women's breasts, and Lambourne emphasized the brutal similarities between the crimes. Sheila pointed out the eyewitnesses who could not identify Prince as the man they'd seen in the vicinity of the murders. In most of the cases, he said, there was no physical evidence against his client. He described the many differences among the crimes, insisting that they could not be viewed as a whole. Then it went to the jury. The jurors deliberated 9 days before they returned a verdict on July 13, 1993. Prince was found guilty of all 6 counts of murder as well as 20 burglaries and a few other charges. One reporter said that a member of his team had to coach him to react to this verdict, so as not to break his mother's heart. She continued to insist to the press that her son was not the killer. The special circumstance of multiple murders was sufficient grounds for giving him the death penalty. The same jury made this decision, recommending execution in the gas chamber or by lethal injection at San Quentin. Prince stood in court to face the victims' families and said, "I did not kill any of your daughters." He talked about how he'd seen pictures of the crime scenes, and he'd cried over them, insisting again and again that he was innocent. Judge Hayes affirmed the sentence, and Prince joined 14 other men on California's death row at San Quentin. In May 2007, he appealed the conviction, but the California Supreme Court upheld the death sentence for Prince in a 159-page unanimous ruling that dismissed basically all of the legal beefs Prince's attorneys presented. As to his claim about pretrial publicity, the court found that the majority of the articles published prior to the trial had been framed in neutral terms. The judge had taken pains to keep Prince's picture out of the papers, so there was little basis for Prince's claim of unfair prejudice. The brunt of the complaint was against the use of Special Agent Larry Ankrum, the profiler. Essentially, Prince stated that jury members did not need an expert to help them see the linkage at the scene, and having the expert in that role prejudiced them against him. Chief Justice Ronald George concluded that the testimony had not been improper because Ankrum had only described the process of linkage analysis performed by the FBI to indicate that it was likely the same person had committed all 6 murders, but had not concluded that Prince had committed any of the murders. His testimony had been restricted to a method, which was appropriate. He had provided a context for meaning. 4 other points of contention were also dismissed, including admitting statements that Prince had made to friends who testified, admitting evidence about premeditation, and complaints about a limited closure of the courtroom during the FBI agent's testimony about an unrelated murder. Prince is now 55 years old, and he is serving his sentence on death row at San Quentin State Prison. Only 13 people were executed in California since 1976, so it's likely he will die of natural causes.
On Halloween night in 2002, 38-year-old Tina Mayberry stepped out of Gibson's restaurant in Douglasville, Georgia, where she'd been attending a Halloween party dressed as Betty Boop. Moments later, she staggered back into the bar, bleeding from stab wounds and seeking help. Despite frantic efforts of partygoers and the paramedics, she died a short time later at an Atlanta hospital. She had neither been robbed nor sexually molested. There was no apparent motive, no clues, no suspect. In March 2003, 16-year-old Amanda Greenwell disappeared. Her badly decomposed body was discovered a month later, stabbed, and her neck broken. Again, no motive, no clues, no suspect. According to James Allen Fox and Jack Levin in their book The Will to Kill, one of the most striking and intriguing aspects of serial murderers is the nature of their motivation. Although it has been loosely described as motiveless, there is indeed one to satisfy an intense appetite for power and sadism. The serial murderer tends to kill not for love, money, or revenge, but just for the fun of it because it makes him feel good. Then, on April 15, 2004, Patrice Andres showed up at her beauty salon like any other day. As usual, she was upbeat and smiling and joking with the customers. She had left a love note on her husband's car that morning that read, "The best is yet to come." The mother of a 16-year-old boy from a previous relationship, Patrice was totally devoted to her husband and son. When a customer arrived for her noon appointment, Patrice's salon, Tambour's Trim and Tan, was empty. The front door was unlocked, her purse and keys were on her desk, her lunch was in the microwave, and her car was out in front, parked at an odd angle. But the cash drawer was empty. Patrice had disappeared without a trace. Andre's past had been a tough one, including a substantial drug history. According to the Atlanta Journal and Constitution, she'd worked long and hard to quit messing with drugs and turn her life around. She'd gone back to school to learn the beauty trade, opened her own hair and tanning salon, married Rob Andres, and the two had plans to buy a bed and breakfast in Flagler, Florida. Life was good. Over the protests of her family and friends, who say she was happier than she had ever been, police could find no motive for anyone to do anything to Patrice. They became convinced she had run off. But Patrice's husband, Rob, knew better. Rob held a series of car washes to fund a reward for her safe return, which eventually netted $17,000. He plastered the town with posters with Patrice's photo and the police station was flooded with over 700 leads. Air and ground searches revealed nothing. Rob worked tirelessly for months, searching for his bride. A witness said she saw a man in a white cargo van blocking the entrance to Patrice's salon on the morning she disappeared. Community-wide searches went on from Coal Mountain all the way to Matt. But community energy like that is hard to sustain, and around Christmas, the posters began to come down, along with the reward fund collection boxes. There were still no clues. Not a single lead had panned out. This was not the first time a woman had gone missing in a grisly tale of terror. Rob Andres had no idea that his wife's disappearance was just the latest in a long string of murders which had begun a decade earlier. In Baxter Springs, Kansas, 20-year-old Jennifer Judd was stabbed to death with a knife in the kitchen of her own home on May 11, 1992. Justin Judd, her husband of only 10 days, found her body. Her keys were on the living room floor, and the lunch she had packed to take to him was on the front seat of the car. At that state of the forensics art, there were no clues left at the crime scene. There was no apparent motive and no suspects. On June 28, 2004, a decomposed torso of a young prostitute was found near Wright City, Missouri. Passers-by told investigators that they saw a white utility van at the rest stop off Interstate 70, near where the torso was found. The unidentified woman was buried during a ceremony complete with flowers, prayer, and a few mourners who stood in place of the woman's unknown family members. And then, on September 18, 2004, family members found 45-year-old Lisa Nichols from Turnerville, Alabama, a divorced mother of 2 daughters, dead in her bathroom. She'd been raped, shot 3 times in the head, and set on fire. John Paul Chapman was a good-looking, charismatic guy living in a Douglasville, Georgia trailer park, where he always found himself in trouble with the law. He fancied himself quite the ladies' man, but as with most alcoholics and addicts, his addiction always came first, and under the influence, he did some bad things. He'd been arrested for drugs, for indecent exposure, and for trespassing. His neighbors remembered him as being a scary kind of guy, paranoid from drugs and alcohol, always worried that the police were closing in on him. Every time he was arrested, his fingerprints were sent to the FBI, and they came back only as matches to his previous arrests in Georgia. This eventually proved to be a very costly error. One neighbor, who played cards and drank regularly with Chapman, mentioned once that prayer might help John with his problems. He even suggested that they pray together. It was a bad suggestion. Chapman flipped out, saying he couldn't handle prayer in his house. He was indeed a scary guy. Young Amanda Greenwell lived in and disappeared from the same trailer park. Nobody had any idea that John Paul Chapman was anything but a small-time druggie doing small-time crime, because the FBI's fingerprint database failed to confirm his true identity. Law enforcement lost an opportunity to prevent further criminal activity by this individual, the FBI later said in a statement, according to the Chicago Tribune. Law enforcement agencies across the country submit roughly 50,000 fingerprint comparison requests a day to the FBI system, which contains 45 million sets of prints. Given the size of the system, some errors are bound to occur, said the editor of the Journal of Forensic Identification. Like more than 80% of the fingerprints submitted to the database facility in West Virginia, Chapman's fingerprints were submitted as digital images. Sometimes the quality of these images can be a problem, leading to errors, either false identification, such as the implication of an Oregon lawyer in the Madrid train bombings in 2004, or, as in this case, the failure to correctly identify John Paul Chapman. Jeremy Brian Jones lived in a middle-class home in Miami, Oklahoma, where his mother was a florist and his father a woodshop supervisor. He had trouble in high school and was transferred to school in Quapaw because of discipline problems in Miami. He went to school for a short time before dropping out. Jeremy Jones's first run-in with the law was in January of 1990 when he was 16 years old. He was charged with assaulting a boy, and when his mother came to his defense, Jones assaulted her as well, according to the Joplin Globe. One of Jones's high school classmates was Justin Judd, and Jones eventually lived next door to Judd for a while. Jones was a problem neighbor, according to Judd. "We called the police on him several times," Judd said. "You could hear his wife or girlfriend screaming all the time. The police would show up and she'd say, 'Nothing's wrong,' and the police would leave." In 1992, Justin Judd's bride, Jennifer, was murdered, stabbed to death in her own kitchen. Jones's first rape charge came on November 5, 1995. He was charged with rape a second time on January 10, 1996, along with the unlawful possession of meth. The following day, he held a loaded revolver to a woman's vagina and threatened to shoot her. He spent time at the Dick Connor Correctional Center in Hominy, Oklahoma, where he sobered up and felt bad about his drug-fueled crimes. On March 3, 1997, he pleaded guilty to 3 charges of sexual battery and received a 5-year sentence of probation. The 2 girlfriends he raped were afraid to testify. His court-mandated sex offender counseling sessions didn't go well, and he was ultimately kicked out. He flat-out ignored the 2 court-ordered requests for DNA samples. On October 19, 2000, a warrant was issued for his arrest for probable cause. His probation was being revoked. He sold his truck and hit the road with the proceeds. He left Oklahoma on the run. In Joplin, Missouri, Jones met the mother of a Missouri prison inmate. He was complaining of her that the system was out to get him, and she loaned him her son's identity, John Paul Chapman. He spent his time on a bus from Joplin to Tuscaloosa, Alabama, memorizing his new identity, complete with social security number and birth date. He drifted, working as a delivery driver, a construction worker, and whatever else he could find, from Oklahoma to Atlanta. A bounty hunter tracked him to Tuscaloosa, so he went to Mobile, Alabama, looking for work as a laborer, hoping to stay one step ahead of his past and earn some quick cash helping to rebuild in the aftermath of Hurricane Ivan. He found employment and lodging with an empathetic and religious home builder and his family. But walking the straight and narrow wasn't his style, and he soon found himself back on the street. His silver tongue and good looks soon found him fresh lodgings with another casual acquaintance in his family. But his presence made the wife very nervous. It wasn't long before he was kicked out again. One of his former roommates believes Jones had it in for women. He was always saying derogatory things about women, about putting them in their place, about smacking them down, she said. One of his favorite jokes was, "What do you tell a woman with 2 black eyes?" "Nothing. You done told the bitch twice." People either loved him or were repelled by him, yet his self-image remained untarnished. "I'm a likable guy," he said in a recent interview. "I'm the guy next door." But a former roommate saw his darker side. The monster came out when he was on meth. The monster seemed to be an increasingly larger part of his personality. According to Peter Vronsky in his book Serial Killers, The Method and Madness of Monsters, serial killers, although often described as monsters, rarely appear to be creatures with blood dripping from their fangs or crazed psychopaths babbling satanic rituals. While a few are exactly like that, many appear at first glance to be healthy, normal, and even attractive people. And that is precisely the problem with a serial killer. A victim rarely gets beyond the first glance. Others are simply invisibly unmemorable and unnoticeable until someone notices them killing. On Halloween in 2002, Jones went to Gibson's, a favorite bar in Douglasville, where a Halloween party was in full swing. Monsters other than those with plastic masks were apparently out that night, because at midnight, Tina Mayberry stumbled in from the parking lot and then died from her stab wounds. In September 2004, when family members found 45-year-old Lisa Nichols, a divorced mother of 2 daughters, dead in her bathroom, the community came alive to help solve the murder. Lisa had been raped, shot 3 times in the head, then set on fire. From the beginning, neighbors were helpful. One remembered seeing a vehicle parked outside Nichols' home. Another recalled part of the license tag number. Quickly, the evidence led police to a man named as Oklahoma. A man who employed Oklahoma as a laborer gave police his full name as he knew it, John Paul Chapman. He also provided authorities with a social security number and a birth date. Now, the police had a suspect. 4 days later, Detective Birch, the lead detective investigating Nichols' murder, got a call on his cell phone. It was John Paul Chapman. An incredulous Birch kept Chapman talking on the phone while his partner traced the call. They talked about this and that, even the weather. 20 minutes later, police surrounded the suspect, who was inside a house not far from where Nichols had been killed. He was still on the phone with Detective Birch. Police charged him with capital murder, rape, burglary, and kidnapping in Nichols' death. Police were happy to have him in custody, but the seriousness of the situation had yet to come to light. As a matter of procedure, Birch had Chapman's fingerprints run through the FBI's database, the Integrated Automated Fingerprint Identification System. This database holds more than 200 million sets of prints and is tapped more than 50,000 times each day by law enforcement agencies around the world. The AFIS data on John Paul Chapman came back naming the John Paul Chapman alias he'd been using, even though Jeremy Brian Jones's fingerprints had been in the system since 2000 when he skipped bail in Oklahoma. Obviously, the FBI later admitted, there was a glitch. This attempt was the fourth time the AFIS failed to match Jones's true identity to his original prints, a mistake that apparently had deadly consequences. Between October 2003 and June 2004, Jones, posing as John Paul Chapman, was arrested 3 times in Georgia on minor offenses. All 3 times, authorities sent his prints to the FBI, but the computer system never made a match. Had the match been made, local authorities said, Jones would have remained in jail. Instead, he was released, and police say he killed 4 more women. Catherine Collins, whose body was found in New Orleans on February 14, 2004. Amanda Greenwell, a 16-year-old Douglas County girl whose body was found in April 2004. Patrice Andres, a hairdresser who vanished on April 15, 2004. And Nichols, found in her Alabama home in September 2004. Jones was charged in the death of Collins, Greenwell, and Nichols. He remains a suspect in the Andres slaying. In response to queries by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the FBI admitted that a mistake occurred with its database and is now investigating the errors and making certain the database is working properly. If Jones had been arrested in Mobile on a minor offense like before, chances are they would have set him free to kill yet again. But this time, facing murder, rape, and other charges in the death of Lisa Nichols, the suspect was held without bond. Still naive about the true identity of the man they had in jail, detectives sent out a routine national teletype, just in case Chapman was wanted in other states for other crimes. Missouri responded, saying they knew a John Paul Chapman with the same social security number and date of birth, but that man had been in their prison since 1999. They sent along a photograph of their inmate and a set of fingerprints. Neither one matched the man in custody in Mobile. For a week, police worked around the clock trying to figure out the puzzle. And then the suspect himself gave them a clue. John Paul Chapman made several telephone calls from the jail's payphone to a number in Miami, Oklahoma. The phone number belonged to Jean Beard. A Miami detective told the Mobile police that he knew Mrs. Beard and knew there were outstanding warrants for her son. His name? Jeremy Brian Jones. The Miami detective sent Jones's photos and fingerprints to Mobile, along with the outstanding warrants. This time, said Marvin Whitfield, a crime scene investigator with the Mobile County Sheriff's Office, the prints matched. Chapman was surprised, to say the least, when presented with the outstanding warrants for Jeremy Brian Jones and evidence of his duplicate identities. While awaiting trial for the rape and murder of Lisa Nichols, Jones confessed to killing as many as 8 women in metro Atlanta, including 5 prostitutes. He gave specific detailed confessions to police in private, but maintained his innocence in the presence of his mother and his girlfriend. He detailed the crimes, including the victims' names and the locations of the killings. Mobile Sheriff's Detective Paul Birch said Jones was very nonchalant and matter-of-fact in recounting the rapes and killings. The more Jones talked, the more the body count began to rise. By November, the count was up to 13 victims, 10 of which were women. Then 17. Then 21 in 5 states. Jones passed a polygraph where he talked of picking up prostitutes on stretches of Atlanta streets lined with strip clubs and dumping their bodies in wooded areas. and once off a bridge into a river. He even sketched a rough map of the locations where he committed crimes in Alabama, Georgia, Oklahoma, and Kansas that dated back to 1992. Investigators in Delaware County, Oklahoma, learned that Jones was responsible for the 1996 killings of Doris Harris, 41, and Daniel Oakley, 38, who were shot. The trailer they lived in was set on fire to obscure their murders. He also confessed to police that he had murdered 19-year-old Justin Hutchings of Pitcher, Oklahoma, in 1999. Jones killed Hutchings with a lethal injection, he told investigators. Jones had lots more to say. He bragged at one time that he could talk the panties off a nun. He thought of himself as a ladies' man and considered himself to have been born lucky until the meth got hold of him. He also mocked the authorities who arrested him 3 times in Georgia, failed to match his fingerprints, and set him free. Douglas County Sheriff Phil Miller said they were going to approach his confessions with cautious optimism. Jeremy Jones has confessed to the deaths of Tina Mayberry, Patrice Andres, and Amanda Greenwell, he said. There was some evidence to support the Greenwell confession, but almost no evidence to support the confessions in the Andres or Mayberry cases. On February 14, 2004, Catherine Collins, 45, was found stabbed to death in New Orleans. Jones has been charged in that killing. On December 30, 1999, Danny and Kathy Freeman of Welsh, Oklahoma, were shot to death, possibly to settle a drug debt. The killer set fire to their home. That same night, their 16-year-old daughter Ashley and her friend Laura Bible disappeared. Jones admitted to murdering the girls and said he threw their bodies down a mine shaft. Jones also admits stopping at Tamber's Trim and Tan salon, high on meth and needing directions. When he found Patrice Andres, an attractive petite brunette, alone in the shop, he said he kidnapped, raped, and killed her, dumping her body off a bridge in Douglas County. After his capture, he seemed eager to talk to anyone who would talk with him, trading interviews and confessions for visits with his family and his girlfriend. Investigators from Oklahoma, Georgia, Louisiana, and California traveled to Mobile to talk with him. His court-appointed attorney, Habib Yazdi, dismissed all his confessions. He'll talk to anyone and confess to anything if they'll let him talk to his mother and his girlfriend for hours. He's getting fancy lunches with crab claws and dinners and drinks. Then he later says it's all false. Assistant DA John Furman said that the charismatic Jones was thriving on the national media attention, including segments on The Today Show, CNN, Fox News, and A Current Affair. Vicki Freeman, Jeremy Jones's girlfriend, continues to believe in him. She says that the police have it all wrong. He's a wonderful man, she said. He's caring, considerate, loving, gentle. Freeman, 14 years Jones's senior, met him in 2003 at the same bar where Tina Mayberry was stabbed. Jones approached her and told her she was beautiful. It was apparently love at first sight. But love with Jeremy Jones has a dark side, and Freeman admits that he'd been physically abusive, but that they always made up. She thinks that the police are piling all their old crimes on her lover, trying to clear their books of unsolved murders for brownie points. He's a low-rent Ted Bundy, ADA John Furman said in Mobile. Otherwise reasonably smart women somehow find him interesting. He doesn't look like a monster. Obviously, Vicki Freeman is playing with fire. She only knew him as John Paul Chapman until his arrest. She'd called the police on him at least twice, once when she was afraid for her life, after which she declined to press charges, and another time after he reportedly shot up 2 grams of meth and was trying to kill himself. When he and Freeman moved into an apartment together in September 2003, Jones chatted up the neighbors, attracted to their 18-year-old daughter. The police arrested him for exposing himself to the girl and repeatedly trying to enter her apartment after her parents had left for the day. Outside the daughter's bedroom window, the girl's parents found a box containing binoculars, rope, and tape. After Hurricane Ivan, Jones moved to Mobile to find construction work. "I wanted to come down here, live on the beach happily ever after," he said. He phoned Freeman to tell her that he'd found work. She was pleased at the news, told him to get a place for them to live, and she'd be down to join him. He made that phone call from Lisa Nichols' telephone. The next day, Lisa Nichols was dead, raped, shot, and set on fire. Jones has since denied that he killed anyone. In spite of his public confessions, he faults the FBI for failing to discover his true identity, and as a result, he's been labeled a serial killer. He even denies confessing to any killing. Prosecutors speculated this about-face was a prelude to an insanity defense. According to John Douglas in his book Journey into Darkness, serial killers and sexual predators do what they do not because they need to eat or to keep a family from starving, or even to support a drug habit. They do it because it feels good, because they want to, because it gives them satisfaction. You can make the argument that many of them are compensating for bad jobs, poor self-image, mistreatment by parents, any number of things, but that doesn't mean we're going to be able to rehabilitate them. My colleague, Greg McCrary, uses the analogy of a cake. You've baked this chocolate cake, which smells great and looks terrific, but as soon as you bite into it, you realize something is very wrong. Then you remember, oh yeah, in addition to the eggs and flour and butter and cocoa, I recall mixing in some axle grease from my workshop. That's the only problem with the cake, the axle grease. If I can just figure out a way to get the axle grease out of the cake, it will be perfectly fine to eat. This is the way I view rehabilitation of sexual predators, particularly serial sexual predators. The fact is that in the vast majority of cases, the urges, the desires, the character disorders that make them hurt and kill innocent men, women, and children are so deeply ingrained in the recipe of their makeup that there's no way to get out the axle grease. During the trial, Jones blamed Lisa Nichols' neighbor for her death, but he said in other statements that he killed Lisa and burned her body while high on methamphetamines. He said, "It was like a nightmare. I was in a movie. I was higher than I'd ever been in my whole life." Alabama Attorney General Troy King said Jones targeted his prey like any predator and never showed even an ounce of remorse. Lead prosecutor Assistant Alabama Attorney General William Dill called Jones a classic sociopath. He said Jones testified at length and talked about Nichols and her family, but never shed one tear. However, when he spoke about his own mother, he bawled. Defense attorney Greg Hughes sought a life sentence without parole, saying Jones suffered extreme mental and emotional problems, including long-term drug addiction. Jones was convicted on October 26, 2005, of rape, burglary, sexual abuse, and kidnapping during capital murder in the slaying of Lisa Nichols. A jury deliberated only 35 minutes before voting 10-2 for Jeremy Bryan Jones to be put to death. Circuit Judge Charles Grate, not bound by that recommendation, called Jeremy Bryan Jones a danger to civilized society as he sentenced him to die by lethal injection. Jones told the court, "God will have the final say," before Grate sentenced him. An appeal is automatic. Jones contends his confessions in the Nichols killing and others were just lies to get extra jail privileges like phone calls to family and meals. He vows to beat his case on appeal. He is yet to face charges in Georgia for the March 2004 killing of 16-year-old Amanda Greenwell of Douglas County. "One day I'll be a free man," Jones said. "I'll write me a book and laugh my ass off." When police in Ashland, Ohio, first got a distress 911 call about a woman being held hostage in a home, they did not know what to think. Such calls are incredibly rare, especially by the victim herself, and would seem like it was straight out of a crime novel. But unfortunately for the victim, it was not. Instead, police rushed to the woman's aid, only identified in court documents as LS, to save her from her attacker. After police arrived at the house on covert court, what they discovered would chill even the most hardened law enforcement officers. In an upstairs bedroom, a partially bound, bloodied, bruised woman was found alongside her attacker. After securing her and arresting her captor, police began a thorough search of the house. In an upstairs closet in another room, police found a decomposing body that was bound and gagged. In the basement, officers found another decomposing woman underneath a pile of clothing. But who were these women? What happened to them? And most importantly, who was the man that caused all this destruction? The man arrested that day in the house was a homeless drifter by the name of Shawn Michael Grate. When police brought Grate in for questioning, not only did he make a full confession for the attack he had just committed and for killing the woman found in the Covert Court house, he confessed to other murders too. He even led investigators to another body behind a burned-down house not far from the Ashland home where he was arrested. But who was this man who, seemingly overnight, had developed a penchant for hatred towards women? Or was it? Grate was born in Marion, Ohio in August 1976. His mother had just come out of an abusive first marriage and was working as an exotic dancer when she met his future father at a club she worked at. After a whirlwind marriage and subsequent divorce, she gave birth to Grate and his sister. After his parents had divorced, Grate's mother eventually gave up custody of the children to their father. While little is known about his time as a toddler to his teenage years, what has been confirmed is that his first signs of trouble began when he was just 17 years old. His high school sweetheart had become pregnant with his first child during this time. As most high school relationships go, the love did not last, and the couple fought often. His then-girlfriend claimed that Grate was abusive toward her in every possible way, including using physical violence towards her. One day she was fed up with it and tried breaking up with Grate, and he did not handle the rejection well. Instead of letting her walk away, Grate began violently choking the young woman. It's unclear how she got away, but it is known that this was his first arrest. Grate pled guilty to a simple domestic violence charge and would continue on to graduate high school. After leaving high school, Grate became more or less a drifter with no job, no money, and no direction in life. To support himself, Grate would usually mooch off his friends and family for whatever he could get by with. When this support was not enough, he resorted to stealing what he wanted. It was for this that he picked up his first serious charge in 1996 when he and a friend were busted during a residential burglary. After getting a 4-year sentence, Grate served just a year and a half of it before being released in October 1997. After his release, he quickly went back to his old ways. While he had nothing going for him, that did not stop a harem of women from being attracted to him. As his mother and other female companions would later describe, even from an early age, Grate was a charming and manipulative character. He knew all the right words and all the right things to do to win men and women alike over. However, as countless girlfriends and his ex-wife would later attest, Grate had a dark side. As most cowards are, behind closed doors, they turn into a completely different person. Just like a chameleon, the charming facade and couth smile would melt away into the monster he truly was. No one knew this better than the mother of his second child. While she wanted to remain anonymous for her own safety, this does not diminish her story's impact on unmasking the true character of Shawn Michael Grate. According to her, Grate was physically and emotionally abusive towards her during their several-year relationship in the late 90s through the early 2000s. During the course of their relationship, he would often beat her and isolate her from seeing her friends and family. Even after she became pregnant with his child, that did not stop Grate from beating and abusing her. It was only when she, too, left him that he came back and violently choked her. To him, this was the greatest transgression she could have taken, and after this incident, he was charged with yet another domestic violence incident. But despite this parole violation, he was not put back into prison. Instead, he was remanded back into society when, a month later, he broke into her house again and threatened her over the most recent charges related to the choking assault. Even after he was charged in this incident, a judge did not revoke his parole. Instead, he was released once again, and it would not be until October of 1999 that things came to a fever pitch. Grate's son had been born the month before, and he had requested court permission to visit him. The court denied his request because of his pattern of abuse towards the mother. Angry and frustrated at not being able to see his son, he went after the young mother and the newborn's grandmother with a knife. When Grate approached the trio at the grandmother's home, the two got into a fight over the knife. During the struggle, Grate was cut several times while the mother of his newborn child suffered a severe cut on her finger. It was not until this most recent attack that the courts finally revoked his parole and sent him back to prison to serve the remainder of his 4-year sentence. Even though prosecutors asked to file new charges on this most recent attack, for some unknown reason, the judge found it appropriate enough to just send him back to prison for a parole violation. And that is where Grate stayed until 2003, when he was released from prison. From 2003 until his arrest in 2016, little is known about Grate, probably due to his lifestyle. After being released from prison, according to friends and family, Grate was lazy and refused to find a job. Instead, he continued to support himself through thefts and trying to win over a series of increasingly younger and more vulnerable women. After befriending these women with his charismatic charm, he often lived with them for free. Whenever he got tired of them, or they left due to his violence, he would just find another woman to repeat the cycle. While little remained steady for Grate as he bounced around northern Ohio for the next 13 years, the one constant in his life was his need to batter and abuse women who were close to him. Over those 13 years, at least 3 women testified about the abuse that they had suffered at the hands of Shawn Grate. One of these women was an ex-girlfriend named Christina Hildreth. After meeting Grate in 2005, she was instantly smitten with him. But soon after the honeymoon phase was over, Grate began his usual pattern of beating and controlling her. After suffering years of abuse, things finally came to a head during one beating when he was punching her, and she threw her hand up to defend herself. During this assault, Grate broke her hand, and he then decided to take her to the hospital. When they first arrived, Hildreth first stated that she had fallen down and put her hand out to brace herself. It was not until Grate had left the room that she confided in the nurse that he had, in fact, been beating her. When hospital staff called the police, Grate fled. Grate tried to hide for several days, but after 4 days on the run, he returned to her home where police then arrested him. After first charging him for the assault, police also charged him for some of the other attacks he had done to her she had not previously reported. From hitting her multiple times in the face to choking her, police charged him with numerous domestic violence offenses. Perhaps most interesting in this case was the harbinger of what was to come for his future murders. Christina claimed that despite having 2 other children from prior relationships, Grate did not want the kids living at her house with them. Why he did this is clear. He tried to control every aspect of this woman's life, and he needed to have her all to himself. He did not want anyone to interfere with what he was doing, and it was for this reason that he isolated his victims from any prying eyes. Unfortunately, just like his previous spat of domestic violence charges in 1999, he was let off with light sentences in the county jail and soon released. Not long after the 2010 incident in which he was arrested, he met another local Mansfield woman whom he married in December 2011. But after not even a year of marriage, she filed for divorce, claiming the same type of abuse as other women had befallen at the hands of Shawn Grate. Even after she gave birth to his 3rd child and only daughter, he continued to threaten and harass both her and her family members. After he and his wife divorced in 2012, Grate continued his nomadic lifestyle. He bounced around from place to place, from couch to couch. All the while, Grate continued to rack up a series of nonviolent theft, drug, and DUI-related charges. Because of his long rap sheet, the few times he attempted to find gainful employment, he had to pick places that would look past his extensive criminal record. One of those places was the Ashland Salvation Army, where he met his future rape victim known as LS. According to both Grate and LS, after meeting at the Salvation Army, they both took a liking to one another. They bonded over their love of the Bible and would often eat lunch together during work and then take long walks or play badminton at a local park. According to LS, they actually shared a great relationship, albeit a totally platonic one. Though Grate had asked her for her number and asked her out numerous times, she always politely declined. Grate never seemed to take offense to his advances being rebuffed, and LS said that he never got violent with her. However, all that would change on September 10, 2016. On that day, Grate told LS after work he was going to give her a bag of women's clothes he'd found. Because most of the people in Grate's friend group lived on the edge between homelessness and having a roof over their heads, such a gesture seemed very kind to LS. For her part, LS said she wanted to show him some of her favorite Bible verses as a thank you for the gift of free clothing. Grate readily agreed. Once the pair had gotten off work, he took her to the house on Covert Court. Grate did not own this house, but it was used almost as a mix between a halfway house and a homeless shelter owned by a local religious ministry. Here, people could live there for free while they worked and saved up money to get back on their feet. While many people had lived in the house before, it was unclear who all else lived there now. But on the day of the attack, the only people there were Shawn Grate and LS. Shortly after getting in the home, Grate told LS to head upstairs to his room while he went and grabbed the bag of clothes. LS sat on his bed and read her Bible while she waited. Not long after, Grate came back to the room, but he did not have a bag of clothes in his hand. Instead, he ripped the Bible out of LS's hands and told her they would not be reading the Bible today. Instead, he was going to rape her. After quickly subduing her, he tied her hands and feet to the bed frame. Over the next 3 days, he alternated between raping her anally, orally, and vaginally. He also tortured her by using a variety of objects to aid in sexually assaulting her. When not raping her, he would choke her almost to the point of unconsciousness. However, he would always stop short of killing her. One of the more sickening things he did was carve a heart into her pubic hair. He never admitted why he did that, but according to his confession to the police, they were in love and going to get married one day. Perhaps that was his twisted way of showing love towards this totally innocent victim. During the morning of her 3rd day in captivity, she awoke around 6 a.m. and found him fast asleep. Summoning all the courage and strength she could, she untied her bindings and was able to get his cell phone to call the police. Astonished at getting such a call, responding officers came right away and arrested Grate without incident. After his arrest, investigators began searching the house. In an upstairs closet, police found a woman's body, later identified as Elizabeth Griffin, bound and gagged. A woman, later identified as Stacy Stanley, was found in the basement. But while investigators were still trying to identify these women, police at Ashland Police Station were busy interviewing Grate about the kidnapping and rape. While he readily confessed to the crime, it was what came out of his mouth next that most shocked the officers. Not only did he admit to LS's kidnapping, imprisonment, and rape, but he also admitted to strangling the dead women found in his house. According to Grate, the woman found upstairs was named Elizabeth Griffin. He knew Elizabeth Griffin because she was a roommate of LS. According to Grate, he had been dating Griffin and had been trying to comfort her as of late regarding the plethora of mental illnesses she had suffered. While Griffin was a diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic with mania, Grate said she had been suffering from depression a lot recently. He did not state why she was depressed, but he did say that she told him all the time that she wanted to die. For his part, he told detectives that he would just listen at first, but the more she told him she wanted to die, that the more he said he wanted to help her determine if that was what she really wanted. While most people would mean that to be taking the person to a hospital or therapy, Shawn Grate meant his help in an entirely different way. To him, his way of helping her determine if she really wanted to die was to choke her. While he said that he choked her several times when she came to him sobbing about wanting to die, it was around August 16, 2011 that he claims he finally choked her too much. He said that after coming to the house again saying that she wanted to die, he took her upstairs and began choking her from behind. He said that during the assault, she was telling God to forgive him for what he was doing. But unfortunately for Elizabeth, no one came to save her that day. Grate strangled her to death in that bedroom. After killing her, he claims that he then hogtied her. His testimony corroborates the body's condition as it was found with her hands and feet all tied together. When Grate claimed he did it after she died, this seems unreasonable. However, due to the decomposition of the body, no sexual assault examination could conclusively prove she had been raped. However, surrounding her body were several objects that were eerily similar to objects used to assault LS. In regards to the body of Stacey Stanley, a chance encounter would forever change her life. According to Grate, he never knew her before September 8, 2011, when she disappeared. He'd been going to a local BP station when she and her friend had pulled into it with a flat tire. Grate offered to assist her male companion, who had called her son to help change the flat. After her son arrived, he assisted him in changing out the flat tire. Once the two changed the flat, Stacey went inside and bought him a cup of coffee. The cashier later reported that the two seemed happy and cordial with one another. After she bought him the coffee, it's unclear where the man she was with went, but what is clear is that she then left the gas station with Grate. When her car was found the next day abandoned, someone moved the seat all the way back. For a short woman like Stacey, this was not practical. But for a tall man like Grate, it made perfect sense that he drove away in her car. Once they left the gas station, they made their way back to the Covert courthouse. Here, Grate says that they started fondling one another and kissing. Stacey was attracted to him and wanted to press things further. But according to Grate, she was just a tease who wanted to play a game with them by not wanting to escalate their sexual encounter. Grate became enraged because, in his mind, Stacey was a prostitute. The way that she had spoken with the man she had been with in her car at the gas station had been proof enough to him that she was just a loose woman who liked to manipulate men. Whether this is true or not, and it most likely is, Stacey had every right to refuse to escalate their encounter to actual sexual intercourse. But just like his rejections in the past, Grate became furious that he'd been turned down. As she started to walk away, Grate became angry with her and tried to grab her arm. While Grate said she could have just walked away, she did not, and that justified what he did next. He admitted that he forced her to perform oral sex on him. After the act was done, she was furious with him and grabbed her keys, holding her mace on them. Then she maced him in the face, at which point Grate absolutely lost his mind. He strangled her right then and there in the living room and dumped her body underneath some trash in the basement. Stacey's murder is perhaps the most clear-cut modus operandi of a serial killer 40 years in the making. His utter disregard for women as nothing more than sex objects to be controlled is personified no greater than here. Stacey's rejection of his advances infuriates Grace because, to him, her alleged line of work makes her even less than the already low status he assigns to women. During his police interview, Grate remained adamant that had Stacey just walked away, he would not have done anything to her. But the fact that she retaliated against him for the sexual assault by spraying him with mace cost Stacey her life. Even though Grate had just admitted to 2 murders and the brutal assault on LS, he still was not done. He then detailed a murder police had not even been aware of. Grace told them that about 3 months before, in June 2011, he killed his girlfriend of 7 months, Candace Cunningham. When pressed why he did it, he gave an eerily similar line of reasoning as to why he had killed Elizabeth Griffin. Like Griffin, Cunningham apparently suffered from a litany of mental illnesses, including a horrible case of depression. Grate claimed that Cunningham too told him repeatedly that she wanted to die. For his part, Grate said he tried to comfort her and make everything seem all right. However, she was persistent in her feelings about wanting to die. She was so serious about wanting to die that she apparently purposefully overdosed on prescription narcotics numerous times in attempts to take her own life. Grate claimed to be present during these alleged suicide attempts. After multiple failed suicide attempts, Grate claimed he did a mercy killing for Cunningham by strangling her to death in a vacant house and dumping her body behind it. While Cunningham's body showed no signs of sexual assault or any evidence of objects used to sexually assault her, as the three women had near them in the covert courthouse, police suspected this murder too had a sexual motive for the crime. Soon after detailing this murder to police, he even led them to the abandoned house, and sure enough, her body was there just as described. But he still was not done. When police pressed him if he had done any other murders, he confessed to 2 more. The next one was his second kill. He claimed that just over a year ago, in June 2015, he had been at a bar with a local prostitute named Rebecca Lacey in nearby Richland County, where Cunningham's body had been recovered. Grate said that he and Lacey had been drinking and shooting pool at a local bar one June night. During the evening, he left to use the bathroom, and upon his return, he said his money clip had been missing $4. Grate said that Lacey stole the money from him, but offered no proof as to if she could have done it. Regardless if she did it or not, Grate said that they went to a nearby building where he'd been employed as a worker to stock shelves in the back of the business. Using his employee access to get inside, Grate said that he strangled her there and then took her body to a nearby country highway where he dumped it. Lucy's body had been, in fact, found along the side of the road, but her autopsy attributed her death to an accidental drug overdose and not a homicide by strangulation. However, Grate did say that she had been using drugs that night. While it is possible that she could have taken a fatal dose of drugs accidentally, LS did say during her attack he had forced pills into her mouth that he said were muscle relaxers. It's not outside the realm of possibility that he force-fed her a lethal cocktail of drugs to render her incapable of resisting him as he squeezed the life out of her. Why the autopsy would not have detected manual strangulation as the cause of death is entirely plausible. The small bone inside each person's neck that acts as a telltale sign of strangulation is not always broken during such an attack. Manual strangulation may not leave as intense bruising as strangulation by a ligature would. Grate said that he murdered each of his victims by placing his forearm around their neck with his hand placed on their mouth from behind in his interviews with detectives in which he showed them. His self-described method would be even less obvious to pick up, considering that his hands and fingers would not leave distinctive marks on the victim's neck, since his forearm and bicep were the parts of his body actually putting force on the victim. Though there were serious doubts as to this claim, there must have been enough evidence as to its validity since, just 2 days after his arrest, police officially reopened the investigation into Lucy's death. Another investigation that got restarted was the murder investigation into a Jane Doe, which had been recovered almost 10 years before, in 2016. Her body had been found near a dump in Marion County. During this time, Grate had been living in the area with his mother since she had been residing, and he was receiving assistance from family for living expenses. Though police had recovered her body long ago and determined that she had been killed from homicidal violence due to manual strangulation, her identity had never been determined. Grate claimed responsibility for this death, stating that the woman had been a traveling saleswoman selling magazine subscriptions. Grate said that she was selling these subscriptions by stating that she would pay for the first half of them. His mother apparently had said she had not been receiving her subscriptions, and Grate took this as the woman trying to go door-to-door scamming people. In his mind, for this transgression, she was to die. Grate never offered a detailed explanation as to how or why he killed her beyond stating that he strangled her. While the woman may certainly have been a magazine salesperson, she is more likely to have rebuffed his sexual advances towards her. Whether he raped her or not is unclear since her body was found a year after Grate killed her. When police pressed him for her name, he said he could not remember it exactly but knew it started with a D. When pressed further, he said he was 99% sure it was Dana. DNA analysis confirmed the woman's identity as Dana Lowry 3 years after this confession. Few details were made available to determine if the facts of the case matched Grate's confession. Probably because of this, prosecutors decided that the best thing to do was to get Grate behind bars as quickly and as long as possible to ensure that once convicted for the crimes at Covert Court, police would have years to sort out any of his other murders. Because of this, though having confessed to 5 murders and the rape of LS, he was initially charged with 23 counts that included the 2 women murdered at the Covert Court address and the attack involving LS. Police also charged him with a litany of burglaries that he admitted to during his tell-all confession. His defense attorneys really had their work cut out for them. Between a full confession to all the charges, videotape statements, his leading police to Cunningham's body, and the years of corroborating witnesses detailing him as a violent sexual predator, the only defense his attorneys could offer was an insanity defense. After the first court-appointed psychiatrist evaluated him, he found Grate not insane and that Grate had committed his crimes purely for criminal motives. The next psychiatrist to examine him was a man named Dr. Fabian. Dr. Fabian testified that he believed he was legally sane, but that officials should do more testing. Dr. Fabian said that though his examination did not find him insane, perhaps more advanced MRI imaging could tell if his brain was damaged. Such MRI imaging and the doctors trained to interpret such results were few and far between, but he did know a company called Mindset Consulting Group that could conduct the MRI and interpret the results. After getting approval for funds to get the advanced imaging done, the doctor at the hospital where it was done stated he did not have the training to interpret the results. When the court asked Dr. Fabian to interpret the results, he claimed he could just look at some of them and not all of them, lacking knowledge of the rest. When the defense petitioned the court for more funding, this was refused. Because of this, no hard evidence attests to the insanity defense that Grate tried to raise. As a result, he signed a written statement testifying that he gave his consent to withdraw his insanity plea. Now with no defense, the defense went to trial with no witnesses, no evidence, and no other theories that Shawn Grate did all the horrible things he was accused of doing. Though Grate elected a jury trial, it was clear that things were not going his way. Halfway through the trial, he pled guilty to all charges against him except the murder charges, which were the only ones to carry a death sentence. But that did not help him. The jury found him guilty of the 2 murders, and the judge sentenced him to have all of his sentences run concurrently, meaning one after the other. With all the crimes he pled guilty to, he faced a sentence of 90 years to life on those charges alone. For the 2 murders, he was sentenced to death. But that would not be the end of Grate's legal troubles. Almost a year later, in March 2019, he pled guilty to killing Cunningham and Lacey. In September of 2019, after Jane Doe had been positively identified as Dana Lowry, he pled guilty to her murder as well. For these crimes, he received a life sentence without parole for each one. Even after withdrawing his insanity plea, Grate has been fighting his death sentence ever since. Among his claims, one of his most outlandish had to have been his kidnapping charge for LS. Grate claimed in his appeals that because she willingly walked into his bedroom, he could not be guilty of kidnapping her. The Ohio Supreme Court, of course, found this and all of his other arguments without merit. Still, the fact that he even raised such an argument shows that even after his incarceration, Grate's main purpose in life was to exert his control over women. While the Ohio Supreme Court did shoot down all his appeals, his legal team is currently working on appeals to the U.S. Supreme Court. His team's main argument to the Supreme Court has been that because his original trial lawyer withdrew his only viable defense of not guilty by reason of insanity, his counsel was ineffective since he had no defense to offer. While the rule of law allows for all those accused, like Shawn Grate, to be provided with a rigorous defense, lawyers are ethically bound not to lie. Grate's original lawyers did not want to lie by trying to raise an insanity defense that had absolutely no merit. Why Grate raises such claims shows just how much of a coward he is. He was such a hardened killer to prey on vulnerable, smaller women and snuff their lives out, thinking no one would care that they were gone. But unlike Shawn Grate, many people who cared about his victims were gone. In a TV interview shortly after his first homicide conviction, Grate stated that none of his kids or family had visited him since. Hopefully, that will continue until he, too, dies alone and afraid like the 5 women whose lives he cut brutally short.